Palabra al director de la escuela que abrirá el acto. Solo quería básicamente resumiros, en definitiva, el contenido de la jornada, ¿de acuerdo? Empezaremos, abrirá el acto el director de la Escuela Politécnica Superior, luego tenemos a un invitado de honor, Daniel Borrajo, y luego ya empezaréis a presentar los proyectos. Cada vez que presentamos un proyecto, todos los que habéis intervenido en él, bajáis, os sentáis aquí, y uno de vosotros pues se viene al atril y hace la presentación como tal. ¿Vale? Ahí os ruego más o menos agilidad. Tenemos un primer bloque con 4 proyectos, luego tenemos un pequeño descanso, que hay un café servido ahí según salimos hacia el fondo. Y nada, volvemos, otros 4 proyectos. Luego hablará alguien en representación de las empresas e instituciones que han colaborado con nosotros. Luego hablará uno de vosotros, básicamente contándonos cuál es vuestra experiencia. Bueno, podéis ser críticos, encantado. Y ya cerramos la sesión y nos vamos de nuevo a donde servíamos el desayuno y ahí tenemos un pequeño aperitivo para que charlemos todos más o menos relajadamente. Así que sin más, yo ya le doy la palabra a nuestro director y él inaugura la jornada. Gracias.
Buenos días, soy César Huete Ruiz de Lira, el director de la Escuela Politécnica Superior y bueno, y para mí es un placer participar hoy inaugurando esta jornada de Proyecto en Ciencia de Datos. Lo primero que me gustaría hacer, un poco por hacer honor a la palabra datos, es que seáis conscientes de lo bien que está funcionando esta titulación. Hay una alta satisfacción por parte vuestra de todo el título. La demanda del título supera claramente a las ofertas, la oferta que hay. Por primera vez este año tenemos aquí ya a los que están haciendo la doble titulación de Ingeniería en Telecomunicaciones y el grado en Ciencia de Datos. La empleabilidad es prácticamente completa. Yo creo que todos los indicadores que hay, la movilidad está cerca del 50%, la gente que hace práctica está por encima del 80%, ¿no? Un poco por hablar de datos. Yo creo que este título funciona muy bien. Y entonces, para mí es muy fácil estar aquí hoy y poder presentarlo y haceros conscientes de esto, ¿no? Más allá de la jornada. Y funciona muy bien por muchas razones. Y la primera de ellas es porque cuando este título se creó, hace 8 años, se hizo con... Tenéis aquí a alguien que estuvo en la comisión, que es el investigador que viene hoy invitado, Daniel Borrajo, y fue un acierto porque fue el primer título del ámbito que se presentó en la Comunidad de Madrid. Ahora ya hay 10. Entonces, yo creo que es mérito y es un mérito que hay que reconocer, que se hizo, que se apuntó en una buena dirección y que luego se ha ido llevando bien. Y ahí entramos también en agradecer al profesor Fernando Díaz de María, y este es un ejemplo de por qué las cosas están funcionando bien. Funciona bien porque vosotros estáis implicados, porque las empresas están implicadas, y hoy justamente es el ejemplo de ello, y eso es muy fácil de decir, pero no es tan fácil de hacer. Entonces yo creo que, más allá de que ahora estéis un poco nerviosos, ¿no? Porque tenéis que presentar, que yo creo que esto es una jornada también para celebrar lo bien que está funcionando este título y lo mucho que le queda por delante. Así que, volviendo un poco a lo que comentaba, que este título empezó 4 años, yo creo que hace 8 años, perdonad, yo creo que es motivo más que suficiente para celebrar que la persona que estuvo participando en la comisión de la creación, que es el profesor, que fue también profesor de la universidad, profesor Daniel Borrajo, esté hoy con nosotros y nos haga su charla de inauguración. Así que, sin más, paso ya a la palabra al profesor. Gracias.
Hola, muchas gracias. Bueno, primero agradecer a la escuela por haberme invitado a dar una charla antes de que empecéis a contar vuestras cosas. Por presentarme, bueno, ya medio me han presentado, yo fui profesor de la Carlos III hasta Bueno, realmente hasta el año pasado. Lo único que estuve de excedencia desde el 2019 en JP Morgan Chase y en particular, bueno, para los que no conozcáis, me imagino que os sonará, pero JP Morgan es uno de los bancos más grandes del mundo. Es un banco que tiene dos componentes. Una parte es la banca de inversión, que es lo que conocéis como invertir en bolsa, bueno, pues las empresas cómo consiguen dinero. Y luego tiene otro banco que es el banco para la gente como nosotros, que abres cuentas y se llama Chase. Lo único que pasa es que de momento solo está en Estados Unidos y ahora empieza a expandirse un poco en Europa. Entonces, yo he sido académico y sigo siendo académico en el sentido de que, como veis ahí, aparece AI Research, es decir, que yo sigo haciendo investigación. Y también somos un grupo un poco extraño porque los bancos normalmente no tienen un grupo de investigación en inteligencia artificial. Entonces, bueno, pues formo parte de ese grupo, somos alrededor de 100 personas y está dirigido por una académica bastante conocida en el campo de inteligencia artificial que se llama Manuela Veloso. Esto lo tengo que contar, bueno, cuando yo daba charlas como profesor, pues no tenía que decir esto, pero bueno, que todo lo que yo vaya a contar hoy, pues que lo cuento en mi nombre y no en el de JP Morgan y nada de lo que voy a decir tiene que ver con consejos para cómo invertir, ¿no? Bueno, realmente la charla, me voy a intentar fijar en un par de cosas que van a aparecer en la siguiente transparencia, pero por deciros de dónde vengo, yo vengo de inteligencia artificial. Fui profesor del departamento de informática y vengo de inteligencia artificial completa. Entonces, para mí, no necesariamente compartido por más gente en este público o en la universidad en general, para mí Machine Learning o aprendizaje automático está inscrito dentro de inteligencia artificial. Para mí y para mucha más otra gente. Por supuesto, es un campo que se nutre de la intersección entre estadística, informática y otra serie de campos, ¿no? Entonces, como tal, siempre me gusta decir que inteligencia artificial es algo más que ciencia de datos. Es cierto que últimamente, debido a todos los éxitos que tiene este campo, pues parece que ha absorbido inteligencia artificial y la gente dice, bueno, inteligencia artificial igual a análisis de datos, pero inteligencia artificial es algo más. Entonces, por decir que es algo más, pues aquí tenéis una especie de esquema muy simple de que podría ser, básicamente, sensing es la entrada, actuators es la salida, como cualquier sistema informático, uno tiene unas entradas y tiene que generar unas salidas. Y luego hay tres bloques. Uno es representación del conocimiento, que normalmente se obvia en ciencia de datos, pero se le dedica mucho tiempo. Uno piensa que no está haciendo representación del conocimiento, pero le dedicáis mucho tiempo a preparar los datos, a cuáles son los atributos que hay que tomar en cuenta, cuáles son los valores, cuáles son las clases, etc. Hay una componente de razonamiento. Normalmente el razonamiento en aprendizaje automático, en ciencia de datos, es ir desde las entradas directamente a las salidas. No hay un razonamiento explícito. Pero si, por ejemplo, pensáis en lo que hace Google Maps, pues tiene que pensar cuál es el camino para ir de un sitio a otro. Eso es un razonamiento. Y dentro de la empresa hay un montón de tareas que no se ajustan necesariamente a la ciencia de datos. Entonces, bueno, pues que tengáis en cuenta que hay algo más amplio y en el cual os vais a tener que integrar dentro de la empresa. Y por último hay una tercera componente que es en la que se engloba normalmente ciencia de datos, que es la parte de aprendizaje. Cómo conseguimos que el sistema se comporte mejor sobre el tiempo. Donde normalmente en ciencia de datos uno piensa ese comportamiento mejor sobre el tiempo se reduce a que tengo un conjunto de datos, los analizo, extraigo un modelo y lo aplico. Pero normalmente es algo más también que eso. Y me imagino que durante la carrera creo recordar que había una asignatura de inteligencia artificial y seguramente habéis estudiado, por ejemplo, aprendizaje por refuerzo. Entonces son cosas que se salen un poco de lo que es la ciencia de datos per se. Entonces, solamente por dar una idea, pues aquí tenéis un montón de palabras que no voy a detenerme sobre ellas, pero simplemente para decir que es algo más, que hay un montón de trabajo alrededor de muchos de estos componentes, desde todo el tema del lenguaje natural, que hoy en día parece ser lo único que existe, de nuevo, desde el punto de vista de inteligencia artificial. Todo el mundo habla de los modelos de lenguaje grandes, no sé cómo lo traducís o cómo lo traducimos al castellano, o sea, las GPT y compañía, pero hay muchas otras formas de tener entradas, ¿no? Desde imágenes, vídeos, etcétera, sonido. Y luego a la salida también lo mismo, y luego en cada una de estos componentes pues, ha habido un montón de técnicas que se utilizan hoy en día, no están aparcadas por la ciencia de datos o ahora por las LLMs, sino que se utilizan, que están siendo utilizadas dentro de la empresa. Entonces, si os quisierais quedar con un par de transparencias, son esta y la siguiente. Entonces, la primera, que probablemente lo habéis visto a lo mejor durante la carrera, pero a lo mejor no de forma tan explícita, y sí que me gusta comentarlo, porque ahora, cuando terminéis la carrera, pues algunos os dedicáis a másteres y doctorado, la mayor parte os centraréis en empresa, ¿no? Y dentro de las empresas hay un montón de conocimiento. Entonces, lo que no podemos pensar es que todo el nuevo conocimiento que van a manejar las empresas va a venir de datos, porque ha habido un montón de tiempo en el cual la empresa está funcionando con el conocimiento que la gente tenía sobre cómo resolver los problemas. Entonces, hay cierta tendencia actual a pensar que todo va a venir de los datos, todo el conocimiento va a venir de los datos, pero que tengáis la capacidad de pensar, bueno, no, hay una parte del conocimiento que va a venir de los datos y una parte del conocimiento que está en la cabeza de las personas y en cómo han ido resolviendo los problemas. Y que no necesariamente tenemos registro en datos de ese conocimiento. Entonces, tradicionalmente, en inteligencia artificial ha habido dos aproximaciones. Una que está basada en el conocimiento, que la gente tiende a llamarle antigua, pero no tiene nada de antigua. Yo pensaba también que lo que yo me dedicaba, que ha sido esa componente, bueno, yo siempre he estado en medio de las dos, pero desde el punto de vista de investigación, pero está basada en el conocimiento, pues la gente la asocia a los sistemas expertos de los 80, pero yo cuando entré en el banco me di cuenta de que la cantidad de sistemas que siguen funcionando basado en conocimiento, por ejemplo en reglas, es enorme. Y no se puede sustituir ese conocimiento por un modelo que uno ya ha entrenado con datos. Tiene que ver cuál es la forma de que estas dos cosas puedan funcionar juntas. Y siempre a mí es lo que me ha apasionado de la inteligencia artificial, la combinación de estas dos cosas. Entonces, las aproximaciones basadas en el conocimiento requieren conocimiento, o sea, requieren que hablemos con los expertos, leamos libros, extraigamos conocimiento de fuentes para poder crear el modelo. Mientras que la que está basada en datos requiere datos, que normalmente hoy en día existen, pero que hay que extraerlos. Por otro lado, en cuanto a la inferencia, y esto es, de nuevo, yo creo que es relevante y os puede parecer trivial, pero no es tan trivial, en el caso de basado en el conocimiento utiliza la deducción. A partir de unas cosas que yo conozco, puedo deducir otras cosas. Y esa deducción tiene garantías formales, y esto es importante. Tiene garantías formales porque garantiza la corrección. Si el conocimiento de partida es correcto, la deducción te permite generar conocimiento que es correcto. Entonces, dentro de sistemas regulados como los bancos o como las entidades de seguro y otras muchas empresas que tienen que proporcionar salidas correctas a todo lo que ocurre, esto es súper importante. ¿Por qué? Porque, por contra, la basada en datos hace inducción. A partir de un montón de datos, genera un modelo que intenta explicar los datos. Pero, como sabéis, los datos generalmente, en la mayor parte de los casos, están generados con ruido. Tienen ruido, es inherente a la captación de datos por muchas razones, ¿no? Y entonces esto implica que, si bien pueden gestionar muy bien la incertidumbre, el ruido, los errores, la aleatoriedad, no garantizan la corrección ni la optimalidad. Entonces esto, de nuevo, sé que lo sabéis, pero que es importante que cuando estéis trabajando en las empresas seáis capaces de decir, bueno, yo lo que estoy generando, el modelo que estoy generando, va a tener inherentemente errores. Y esto, para algunos casos de algunas empresas, funciona y para otros no. Entonces, uno tiene que entender qué tipo de sistema es el que le interesa dependiendo de las restricciones de lo que os vais a encontrar en la empresa. La segunda transparencia que me interesa que os quedéis con ella es que la unión entre estos dos campos, una posible unión, que es en la que nosotros hemos trabajado en alguna de las cosas que hemos hecho, es que en los sistemas que están basados en la primera aproximación, en el conocimiento, pues básicamente uno lo que intenta es extraer el conocimiento del experto y crear un modelo computacional que imite o que realice las mismas operaciones que hacen los expertos. la aproximación basada en datos, los humanos no interaccionan directamente con los datos, sino que uno, por ejemplo, los clientes de nuestro banco o los empleados realizan operaciones con el banco y esas operaciones quedan grabadas en unas bases de datos. Entonces, esas bases de datos, que pueden ser bases de datos internas o pueden ser bases de datos externas del banco, tiene esas bases de datos y a partir de esas bases de datos uno utiliza una técnica de aprendizaje automático, de análisis de datos, de ciencia de datos, para extraer el modelo, que es el que al final va a funcionar, ¿no? Por ejemplo, para el típico ejemplo de concesión de créditos. Entonces, una forma en la cual nosotros hemos venido trabajando para integrar estas dos formas, cómo podemos integrar conocimiento que las personas tienen en el proceso de análisis de datos, es a través de, que también probablemente lo habréis oído, es a través de la generación de datos sintéticos. Y esta es una rama que está teniendo mucha fuerza y tiene muchísimas aplicaciones. Entonces, una de las formas, hay muchas, una de las formas es básicamente, nosotros tenemos un conjunto de datos y tenemos el conocimiento del experto. Lo que intentamos es ver de qué maneras podemos inyectar ese conocimiento experto dentro del proceso de generación de datos, generando un conjunto de datos que puede tener una semejanza a los datos reales, o puede ser un subconjunto de los datos reales, pero además incluye conocimiento que los expertos están conocen sobre ese campo. Y sobre ello podemos utilizar un algoritmo de aprendizaje o de ciencia de datos para generar el modelo. Entonces, esta es una aproximación que, ya digo, que está tomando bastante auge. Se ha utilizado mucho en visión, por ejemplo, para aumentar las imágenes de gatos y perros y darles la vuelta y cambiarles el color de la piel y alargarlos y estrecharlos y todas las operaciones esas, pero que tiene sentido también hacerlo dentro de bases de datos empresariales. Y esto es algo que lo tengáis en cuenta porque es algo que está siendo utilizado muchísimo. Fernando, dime cuándo tengo que parar porque yo puedo estar infinitamente hablando. O sea que entonces, si tengo que rellenar, o sea, yo creo que con estas dos transparencias me vale. Entonces, cosas relacionadas con esta, por ejemplo, es qué tipos de conocimiento hay. Entonces, nosotros la gente en general en inteligencia artificial ha venido hablando de dos tipos. Uno es el factual, las cosas que son ciertas, las cosas que sabemos que son ciertas. Estamos jugando un juego, hay unas reglas del juego y tenemos que jugar a esas reglas del juego. En banca y en muchas otras empresas reguladas, pues el gobierno crea unas leyes que gobiernan cómo los bancos pueden operar. No podemos hacer lo que queramos, tenemos que seguir esas leyes. Hay leyes que protegen la privacidad de los datos, hay leyes que protegen la justicia, es decir, que cuando concedemos créditos hipotecarios tenemos que tener en cuenta que debe haber el mismo número, porcentaje proporcional para unos colectivos y otros. Es decir, hay un conjunto de regulaciones en todo el mundo, cada país con las suyas, que restringen cómo podemos operar. Y entonces eso es conocimiento, eso, permitidmelo así, no tiene sentido que intentéis extraer modelos a partir de datos que describan estas regulaciones. Estas regulaciones os vienen dadas y, por lo tanto, tenéis que representarlas explícitamente dentro de los modelos de la empresa, tal cual, porque no hay que aprenderlas, no hay que innovar aquí, es algo que nos viene dado. Y aquí tenéis 4 ejemplos, pero hay un montón más, desde restricciones de los clientes de en qué quieren invertir. Cuando un cliente viene a los bancos, pues no dice, pues haced lo que queráis. Bueno, hay clientes que dicen, haced lo que queráis y se fían de los brokers del banco. Pero la gran parte de ellos, especialmente pues las grandes empresas, suelen decir, no inviertas en petróleo, que ahora está bastante de moda toda esta discusión entre petróleo y ciencia y energías renovables. Entonces, no inviertas en petróleo porque a mí no me interesa invertir en fósiles, ¿cómo se llama? Energía fósil, basada en fósiles. Otros ejemplos son, bueno, no voy a entrar en más ejemplos, pero os podéis imaginar que hay un montón de regulación. Esto incluso lo pongo aquí en alemán, simplemente para que veáis que si trabajáis en una empresa internacional, como es las grandes empresas hoy en día, pues vais a recibir regulación en otros idiomas y vais a tener que gestionar esto, ¿no? El otro tipo de conocimiento es heurístico. Y ahí sí que es el campo donde sí tiene sentido hacer análisis de datos y generar modelos basados en datos. ¿Por qué? Porque el conocimiento heurístico son guías de qué es lo que tengo que hacer para tomar una decisión. No está regulado, no es algo que esté regulado, sino que simplemente me dice, bueno, yo creo que en este caso deberías, en el caso de Google Maps, yo creo que hoy deberías tomar esta carretera en vez de esta porque esta está colapsada. No son más que guías, porque puede ser que se equivoque el sistema. Entonces, para ese tipo de conocimiento tiene sentido utilizar el aprendizaje automático. Y de nuevo, en banca y en muchas otras de las empresas donde terminéis trabajando vosotros, pues vais a encontrar miles de ejemplos de esto, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en qué invertir concretamente. Pues yo creo que hoy en día, no sé, por decir algo, Repsol está bien, pues entonces a lo mejor hay que invertir en Repsol. O a quién hacer marketing, cómo gestionar el riesgo, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces, en esa unión que os comentaba, pues, como digo, las reglas, el conocimiento tiene que ser expresado de una manera que pueda ser computacionalmente tratado. Normalmente suele ser a través de reglas y el conocimiento heurístico normalmente lo vamos a poder gestionar a través de hacer creación de modelos a partir de datos. Esto era simplemente para comentar un poco sobre datos sintéticos. Ya digo que hoy en día se está hablando mucho de ello en muchas de las conferencias de aprendizaje automático y de ciencia de datos, pues aparecen artículos relacionados con generación y manejo de datos sintéticos, que tiene sus ventajas. Por ejemplo, hay muchas veces que no podemos compartir los datos entre un departamento del banco y otro departamento del banco por temas de privacidad y por toda la regulación. Y entonces, una forma de resolver ese problema para que un departamento pueda utilizar datos de otro departamento es generar datos sintéticos, que no están basados en la realidad, sino que son la forma que tienen esos datos está basada en la realidad, pero nada más, no el contenido en sí. Y aquí también se puede decir mucho, hay muchos niveles de privacidad. No voy a entrar en detalles sobre eso, pero si a alguno le interesa os lo puedo contar. Cuando uno utiliza datos sintéticos, tiene control sobre qué datos se están generando. Y eso nos permite, por ejemplo, resolver problemas de valores que faltan en los datos o clases desbalanceadas, etcétera, etcétera, que son problemas que seguro que habéis visto en la carrera, ¿no? Y que generan problemas cuando uno quiere utilizar una técnica de análisis de datos. Pueden ser utilizados, y de hecho se ha visto que si uno genera datos sintéticos de una manera controlada, puede mejorar el comportamiento de técnicas de aprendizaje automático. Parece mentira, ¿no? O sea, uno tiene los datos reales, introduce un conjunto de datos que son ficticios, que son datos generados sintéticamente, y de repente la combinación de los dos hace que el sistema se comporte mejor con datos reales que vengan después. Y sin embargo funciona. Esta es una técnica que funciona. Y luego, por último, tiene que ver con la suposición inductiva, que, de nuevo, habéis visto seguro, y es que uno asume cuando tiene datos y hace análisis de datos y genera un modelo a partir de los datos, está suponiendo que lo que ha visto en el pasado es lo que va a ver en el futuro. Y esto es uno de los grandes problemas de la ciencia de datos, es decir, que estamos asumiendo que sobre lo que he hecho el análisis, los datos que yo tengo de partida, va a ser la distribución que voy a encontrarme en el futuro. Y por supuesto, hay un montón de técnicas también para resolver ese problema de cómo trato datos que vienen a lo largo del tiempo y que cambian su distribución a lo largo del tiempo, ¿no? Bien, ya está, un ejemplo de funcionamiento de Google Maps. Entonces, una forma de generar datos sintéticos utilizando ese conocimiento, bueno, pues nosotros hemos ido investigando, hemos generado artículos sobre esto, no voy a entrar a comentarlos, pero simplemente pues que se pueden hacer simulaciones, se pueden crear modelos basados en las acciones que tiene el banco disponibles y a partir de esas acciones generar también modelos de simulación, y por último se pueden incluir restricciones cuando se generan series temporales. Y no voy a entrar en más detalle, pero pero están ahí los artículos si os interesan. Y por último, es la penúltima transparencia, y falta conclusiones y esta simplemente porque no puedo dejar de hablar de LLMs porque, bueno, todo el mundo habla de ellas, ¿no? Entonces, esta es mi forma de ver las LLMs. Primero, que son una compilación de todo el conocimiento que los humanos hemos generado públicamente o semipúblicamente a lo largo del tiempo. Es decir, hemos ido generando datos que hemos puesto a disposición de todo el mundo y ahora son máquinas las que están analizando esos datos y están generando modelos computacionales compactos de todo ese conocimiento que está disponible, ¿no? Entonces, es una forma de ver el conocimiento que tenemos las personas, ¿no? Combinado, integrado y compacto. Pero está en un modelo de lenguaje, es decir, que es un modelo que es experto en trabajar con lenguaje, no con cualquier tarea que queremos resolver las personas dentro de una empresa, sino con el lenguaje, es decir, nos permiten generar frases que tienen sentido y respuesta a cosas que tienen sentido por probabilidad de que una palabra siga a las demás. Entonces, incluyen los dos tipos de conocimiento que he mencionado anteriormente y formas, por lo menos para mí, útiles de ver las LLMs dentro de todo este contexto que he estado explicando, que son operaciones con lenguaje, es decir, que sirven muy bien para generar textos, para sumarizar, para generar abstracts, para responder a preguntas, que permiten generar drafts de cosas, código incluso. Lo vais a utilizar seguramente para generar código y eso es algo que está utilizando la gente para generar código. Son oráculos para conocimiento, para cuando queréis saber el conocimiento sobre algo, le preguntáis a este tipo de sistemas y, bueno, permiten hacer descubrimiento. Pero siempre me interesa poner esta última parte y es que, de nuevo, no nos dejemos engañar por el brillo que tienen. Es decir, que seamos conscientes de para qué sirven. Son súper útiles si las manejamos bien, pero que recordemos que son sistemas inductivos. No tienen la parte de razonamiento. Cuando nosotros le ponemos a resolver problemas que se salen de lo que han visto y que tienen muchos pasos o tienen un montón de conocimiento, normalmente van a fallar. Entonces, porque son sistemas que están basados en inducción, en datos sobre los que han sido entrenados, en este caso lenguaje. Y por tanto no tienen ninguna garantía formal. Lo que ellas generan va a tener que haber una persona o algo que gestione el proceso de test, de comprobación que es correcto. Y bueno, para concluir, pues un resumen de todo lo que he contado, ¿no? Que hay que integrar estas dos formas de razonamiento, que el aprendizaje de la ciencia de datos nos permite adquirir ese conocimiento heurístico, no tanto el factual. Para mí no tiene mucho sentido, cada uno es libre de hacer lo que quiera, por supuesto. Que la generación de datos sintéticos nos permiten inyectar conocimiento de una manera más o menos controlada a los procesos de aprendizaje, y las LLMs pueden sustituir al conocimiento en algunos casos, incluyendo, por supuesto, siempre esa componente de check. Y por mi parte, nada más, y muchas gracias de nuevo por la invitación.
Muy bien, pues muchas gracias al Borrajo. Realmente para mí es un honor que haya venido hoy aquí a darnos esta charla. Y bueno, ya recordarnos que efectivamente la inteligencia artificial es algo muy grande y ahora estamos metidos como en una vorágine de algo que es parte de la inteligencia. Arrancamos entonces con nuestra jornada previamente dicha y empezamos con el proyecto titulado Anonymization in Video Content, que ha sido realizado por Andrés Navarro, Daniel Cocien, Paula Abad, Jorge Pérez, y han colaborado, han hecho colaboración con Augmented, con el Acto. Adelante.
Vale, pues pasa esto. Okay. So, okay. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Fapien. My colleagues are Andres Navarro, Paula Abad, and Jorge Perez. And we are going to present our work on face anonymization in video content. This project was conducted in collaboration with HP under the guidance of Ines Martinez, Paula Serna, Claudia Garmendia, and Harold Molina. So let's begin. As you know, in our digital society, vast amounts of video are created every day. And it is not only an ethical responsibility, but also a legal requirement to protect the privacy of the individuals that appear in those videos. So that's why we have developed a face anonymization system by evaluating different face detection models and then applying anonymization on them. And finally, developing an interactive application to showcase our findings. Have in mind that this project had a huge constraint, and that one is that we couldn't use GPUs. We were just allowed to use CPUs. As you know, GPUs are very important in nowadays AI. So for the state of the art, we have to have in mind that the privacy laws that exist about data and AI, as you know, we have at an European level the General Data Protection Regulation, at a Spanish level the Ley Orgánica de Protección de Datos, which aim to protect the data of the individuals. And we have a newer EU AI Act, which is aimed at mitigating the risks of AI. Ethics were a major thing to consider in this project, since the ultimate goal was to protect and safeguard the privacy of the individuals, especially in vulnerable cases such as children. Then we also want our model to be inclusive, where that is working for all ethnicities, and to be used in vulnerable contexts such as journalism, for example. Then by using CPUs, as you know, GPUs consume high amounts of power, and this is a very latent topic nowadays. So by using CPUs, we are contributing to developing sustainable AI system aligned with initiatives such as the European Green Deal. Finally, for the use cases, this can be used in a variety of applications, such as the security cameras, research, commerce, and marketing, allowing to users in these fields extracting the insights of video content by protecting the privacy of the individuals that appear in it. Now, we will talk about our methodology. Of course, we needed a data set, first an image data set to test our face detection models, and then a video data set to test our final goal, which is to anonymize faces in video content. So for the images, we used a so-called wider face data set, a very famous data set in machine learning. And this data set, we categorized it in 3 categories: easy, medium, and hard, based on factors such as distance, lighting, occlusion. Then for the videos, we created our own data set from a website called Pexels, which is a very famous content website. And we try to recreate real-world scenarios. Now we will talk about the models we evaluated, which is the central part of the project. First, I want you to have the intuition of how face detection models work. First, we have an input image. For the training phase, this input image is transformed. But for the normal workflow, we use the input image. And then we have a backbone network. This backbone network is a so-called convolutional neural network, which basically perform convolution operations. Those are essentially filter operations, whose weights are trained, and those are applied to the images. Then we extract a feature map from this operation, and this can be used for the next layer, or if it is the final layer, for the face detection model. The face detection model is usually, it can vary, but we consider that it is usually a dense neural network, which finally the output of this network is the detection of the face and also the localization, the bounding box of the face. So now that we know how usually models work, we can discuss the models we evaluated. At first, we have ultra-fast phase, which is a very lightweight model designed for edge devices, that is, for example, cameras. And how it works is that it simulates how humans perceive objects through something called receptive field blocks. Those essentially are modules or tools to distinguish the face from the background. It has a very compact structure and is very efficient, a very good option. Then we have ULD Look 1's version 11, which is a real-time detection object that uses spatial attention, the same mechanism used in LLMs, but applied for images. Although it is made for real-time detection, it is resource-intensive, so it might not be a very good option. Then we have ResNet, which is not a model itself, but more an architecture for convolutional neural networks that uses skip connections. These skip connections let the information flow through the network without being dependent on weights. That helps solving a big problem in deep learning, which is the vanishing gradients problem. That is that the gradients go to zero. Why I mentioned this? Because ResNet is used as a backbone in many face detection networks. For example, in Retina Face, which is a feature pyramid network that performs the multi-scale detection. What multi-scale detections mean? It is that we are essentially, as we go deeper in the convolutional network, we have different layers. We basically perform detection at, not exactly at the layer, but yeah, at each step. And this essentially what does is, like, we are performing detections. You can think about it like performing detections at different distances. Since as we go deeper in the network, we are extracting finer details. Then we have hard cascade. I don't know what happened to this, but this is not a deep learning model. It's a traditional machine learning model that uses hard features. Those are filters that try to imitate the pattern of a face, and we scan with these filters the images, trying to find faces. It is a very simple model, not as good, but really efficient. Then we have face boxes, which is a model designed specifically for CPUs, and it works similarly to Retina Face with multi-scale convolutional layers, but it is more optimized and more compact. Then we have multitask cascaded neural networks. Those are basically multitask cascaded, means that we are performing different steps as we go through the model. First, we extract the face localization. Then we refine the bounding box, since the localization might not be perfect. And finally, we extract the face boundary and facial landmarks. This last step make the model really slow. Not that slow, but slower than the other ones. But we can take it into consideration. And finally, we have UNet, which is an anchor-free model. What anchor-free means? It means that we are not scanning the whole image, but we are detecting. We are going to detect faces in those zones of the image predicted to have a high probability of containing a face, and though being optimized for edge devices. Now that we know our models, we have to know how to evaluate them. We have two metrics: accuracy metrics, which those are precision, which is the rate of true positive to the total instances classified as positives. Then we have recall, which is the rate of true positives to the total positive instances. And we have map. Map is a very interesting metric. It means mean average precision. And in essence, it combines average precision, and a metric called intersection over the union. This metric measures how well the bounding box is placed. So with this metric, we have, in just one metric, a measure of accuracy and localization. Then for the performance, we have the model size. This is basically the storage that takes up the model weights. The memory usage, which is the RAM memory that consumes the model while it is running, which is closely related to the inference time. This is how long it takes for the model to predict the faces and localize them in one image. Now that we know the metrics, we can discuss our results. As you can see, the worst performing models are the simple ResNet, phase boxes, hard cascade. The medium performing ones are the YOLOs and the multitask cascaded neural network. And the best performing ones are the ultra-fast phase and retina phase. As you can see, retina phase is more consistent over the different categories, but ultra-fast phase provides a better result in easy categories. In this case, it depends on what we are looking to do. Are the phases that we are going to detect close to the camera, for example, then our base model would be ultra-fast phase. We want to be consistent, then we maybe must use retina phase. But we have to take into account also the performance of the models. The memory, the storage of the model is not critical in this case, since all the models are really lightweight. As you know, many models can be gigabytes in size, but these models are really small. But the RAM usage is more critical, since we find huge differences. The more optimal models are hard cascade, ultra-fast phase, and phase boxes. And then in the graph on the right, we can see how the fastest models are the simple ResNet, phase boxes, and ultra-fast phase. So with that in mind, now that we know our results, we have to find our perfect model. How we can do that? Balancing between accuracy and performance. In this graph, you have in the x-axis the RAM usage, and in the y-axis, the mean average precision. Our perfect model would be in the top left. So what's the most similar model to our optimal one? Ultra-fast phase. Although retina phase has a higher accuracy, ultra-fast phase consumes more than 2 times less RAM. And finally, in order to showcase our findings, we developed an interactive application with a user interface. As you can see, the user can select different modes: image, video, and selfie camera or live stream. Select the model. Mainly, we're gonna test it with ultra-fast phase in this example. And select the, in the case of images, the data set from which we are gonna load our images. We can select between the easy, medium, and hard data set. As you can see, in the case of ultra-fast phase, it performs really good. And for example, for hard cascade, it takes very long. Then for the video part, we develop, For the video part, as we said, we try to create a data set with real-world scenarios. In trying to mimic, for example, the recording of a security camera. As you can see, for example, ultra-fast phase, as we have seen in the results, in this case, it does not recognize the images well because they are in the distance. And finally, we have the selfie camera mode. This mode is really interesting because it can be applied, for example, for live interviews, or, for example, in journalism to protect the privacy of individuals that appear in the background, or children. And as you can see with ultra-fast phase, it's really good. We can obtain a high frame rate with it. It is resilient to occlusions, changes in the lighting, and so on. So this can be a very good model to be used, as we said, for example, in live interviews. And finally, to end, we can discuss our final outcomes. Basically, we have developed an AI system combining ethical responsibility, that is protecting the individual's privacy, and balancing with technological innovation. From the evaluation we made to our models, ultra-fast phase emerged as the optimal solution, and we have showcased how this model can be applied to real-world use cases, such as through the application we have seen. As future work, we can implement real-time face tracking to make the inference even better for videos and live stream. Then we must ensure the transparency and fairness of AI and make it explainable. And finally, broaden the use cases, for example, expanding it to fields such as healthcare and education. And thank you for your attention. Y ahora, como sabéis, haremos un pequeño resumen en español de lo que hemos comentado de 5 minutillos, así que vamos con ello. Primero, en cuanto a la motivación y los objetivos, hemos comentado que en una sociedad digital donde se crean cantidades ingentes de contenido audiovisual, no es solo una obligación moral, sino un requisito legal proteger la privacidad de los individuos que aparecen en estos vídeos. Por ello, hemos desarrollado un sistema de inteligencia artificial para anonimizar las caras de aquellos individuos en un entorno limitado, es decir, que solo hemos tenido acceso al uso de CPUs y no hemos podido usar GPUs. En cuanto al estado del arte, las regulaciones hemos comentado que tenemos que tener en cuenta las existentes, como el GDPR, la Ley Orgánica de Protección de Datos y la más nueva, el AI Act de la Unión Europea. La ética era una parte central de nuestro proyecto, ya que el objetivo último era proteger la privacidad de los usuarios que aparecen en los vídeos. Y al usar CPUs estamos contribuyendo al desarrollo de modelos sostenibles, lo cual es un tópico latente a día de hoy. Para los casos de uso, hemos comentado que esto puede ser usado en multitud de campos, entre ellos las grabaciones de cámaras de seguridad, marketing, comercio, investigación, dejando a los usuarios de estos campos usar la información que pueden proporcionar estos vídeos a la vez que estamos protegiendo la privacidad de los individuos que aparecen en él. En cuanto a la metodología, hemos usado dos tipos de datos, imágenes y vídeos. Para las imágenes hemos usado el Wider Face Dataset categorizado en 3 niveles, fácil, intermedio y difícil. Y para los vídeos hemos creado un dataset propio intentando simular imágenes del mundo real. Luego a los modelos no me da tiempo a explicarlos todos, pero sí que quiero que os quedéis con la intuición de cómo funciona un modelo de detección de caras. Es decir, hemos dicho que normalmente tenemos una imagen como entrada, tenemos una red troncal, que es una red convolucional con operaciones convolucionales, las cuales son básicamente filtrados, donde los pesos de los filtros son aprendidos por la red neuronal y vamos escaneando con esos filtros la imagen. Esto produce una salida de características que pueden ser usados para la siguiente capa o para el modelo de detección y localización, que puede estar junto o separado. Este modelo pues, detecta si hay caras y las localiza. En cuanto a las métricas, hemos considerado dos tipos de ellas. La de precisión, donde la más importante ha sido la MAP, la cual nos permitía tener una sola métrica datos sobre la detección y la localización de las caras. Y las métricas de rendimiento, donde las más importantes han sido el uso de la RAM, y lo cual está muy relacionado con el tiempo de diferencia, el tiempo que tarda el modelo en predecir las caras de una imagen, lo cual dependerá también de nuestra máquina, por lo que todos los experimentos han sido llevados bajo la misma máquina. Luego, en cuanto a los resultados, tras evaluar todos los modelos, hemos visto que el modelo Ultra Fast Face consigue el mejor balance entre precisión y rapidez. Y por último, hemos visto cómo este sistema puede ser aplicado al mundo real a través de una aplicación interactiva que hemos desarrollado con diferentes modos, como anonimizar imágenes, anonimizar vídeos o anonimizar contenido en vivo. Así, gracias. Aquí ya en el teclado. Sí.
Pero necesitarán ahí para...
Bueno.
Muchas gracias. Vamos con el segundo. El segundo proyecto se titula During Transit, Public Transport Powered by Analytics. Ha sido desarrollado por Alonso Madroñal, Gabriela Marín, Lucas García, Melania Guerra y Pablo Eduardo del Real. Y lo han hecho en colaboración con SAS. Así que adelante cuando queráis.
Sí, no. No pasa nada. Pues si me dais un momentito, pego un trago de agua y comenzamos con esto. Okay, so thank you all for coming, all three groups, mainly the colleagues that are present here listening to us, teachers offering the opportunity, once again, not only to present, but also to develop the product we have been keen on these past few months, and of course the beautiful people coordinating everything on the company side, in our case SAS, but I can see also some different faces of the other companies, so thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really glad to present you today Turing Transit, what we have humbly called reinventing transportation. So who is we? Well, first of all, it's Melania Guerra, who is sadly not here today, but it's also Gabriela Marín, Pablo Eduardo del Royal, and Lucas Garcia, and of course myself, Alonso Madroñal, which I am going to be your guide today throughout this presentation, right? So let's get things clear. Let's discuss a brief agenda on what we are going to do today. First of all, we have the purpose and context, then the mission and the vision. We will do a technical demo with a video so you can understand like the fine details of what we have done, and of course the next steps, meaning if we had like 2 extra months, 3 extra months, 1 year, what we would do to further improve our solution. So first, before getting tricky with the technicals, let me show you what's the need. Trying to understand what's the need, it's kind of complicated because it's not as easily seen as it's easily felt. With this, what I mean is today to get to the university, I live in Carabanchel, which is like 20 minutes here from, in bus. I took the line 34 to get here, and I was thinking, how can I communicate the needs of the network to a diverse group of people that has not been necessarily implicated as I have been with this project. And sometimes reality hits you in the face, and I mean it literally, because I was sitting there and some lady right there next to me was constantly bumping her purse into my head. So, at the third bump, I finally understood how could I communicate what's the problem here, and the problem is simple. Buses are too overcrowded, or as we technically call it, simply put, TFR. What's TFR? TFR stands for track fill rate, which means our main fullness metric for buses, meaning how full is a bus. Just as an example, TFR of 0 means empty, TFR of 1 means at capacity, right? The bus was thought to transport this number of people, and TFR plus 1 means fatal error. We have too many people on the bus, this is not going to work well for the customers. You have the distribution there, and it's kind of worrying because we have more than 30% of the buses twice as full, and we have more than 80% of the buses overcrowded. What does this mean? The network demand is not being correctly supplied, which leads us directly to our purpose and context. EMT offers top service, we all know it, but users are dissatisfied, and they are dissatisfied for a good reason, right? We have to understand as a team and improve that quality of service, and we have to design a solution not only for today, but for the next few days, months, weeks, years, right? So what have we done? Easy. We have designed a software as a service solution with SaaS for the network. It's installable at the end of an ETL pipeline. We will later discuss the datasets we have been using. It's going to track the key project indicators to perform steady health checks on the network status whenever it's necessary, and it can perform what-if analysis, so before creating or taking a corporative decision, we can understand and predict what's going to be the outcome. This solution is scalable, it's replicable, it's adaptable to different types of networks, and most importantly, in a problem of these characteristics, it's profitable, which is one of our main preoccupations when trying to deal with this. So here is a simplified version of what have we done. On the left side, you are going to find the EMT clusters with their datasets, mainly traffic, also some costs of variable costs, the demand of the passengers, of course, and we have some external sources that we have taken from mostly public data available in the City Council's public portal. Mainly weather from the IMET, also traffic information in the lanes and in the districts of the city, and of course a calendar of events, which are really important, and we will get to that later in these kind of problems. So the mission and vision, after that, after creating the product, we said, okay, we have now to use it, right? We have to assess the quality of what we are doing. And we will do it by investigating the top performer lines with our system, optimizing the cost, optimizing the resource flow within the network, and finding growth opportunities for the EMT, which is key, because if not, what we would have done is given them a solution for right now, and we need to do some thinking and some planning for the future too. We will arrive to that later after the technical demo, but this is important. We are operating in two sites at the same time. First, tactically, we are developing a system for right now. Then, strategically, we are thinking, okay, what do I want to be, right? What do we want to do in Madrid in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? So, how have we done it? This is a simple roadmap of our line of thought. I beg your attention here. First of all, we do a simple analysis of the data, mathematically. What does this tell to me? Then we perform an EDA. Are we really underperforming? Yes, we are. We have seen the TFR is terrible. But with the creation of the dashboard, we can understand why are we underperforming. And when we start modeling, and we will see it, we will understand how can we solve and how can we perform up to the standards that we need. Finally, we will arrive to our conclusions. Again, in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, what are we going to do? So here we have a technical demo. So let me be your guest. This is our dashboard. This is the cover of our dashboard. Here what you can see is 2 images, which will lead you to directly our dataset or the portal where you can achieve the datasets, and also a reminder of the mission and vision and whatnot, because you can sometimes lose track with these kind of things. After that, we go to high-level KPIs, mainly number of travelers, cost, number of trips, number of drivers also, right? The personal and the optimization of human resources is key here. Now I am filtering just to check 1 month in 1 given year, and we can see how it automatically updates. And now, look here, we are filtering for 1 line, line 34. This line is key. As we see, it moves a lot of travelers with a high cost, 36K, and with 4,000 trips, more or less. Now, when comparing it to one of our top performer lines, we can see the number of travelers is more or less the same, and the variable cost is 18 times less, which will lead us, futurely, we are comparing the worst and the best, to some crazy comparisons. Now, I am showing you here the page in which we do the time series analysis, understanding how seasonality, which is key, and we will understand why, flows within this project. For the year 2023, for example, again, one of our bottom performers, line 34, what we can understand here is, first of all, we have the costs. We are seeing some steady cost across the year, maybe changing a bit in the bottom lines, which represents Saturdays and festive days. And most importantly, what are we going to see is now in one of these graphs, bottom left, which is demand per month, we can see a huge valley in August. Why? Because everybody in Madrid leaves. And also a huge valley in Sundays. Why? Because people are not as active. So demand greatly changes. Now this could be an outlier, so let's change from line 34 to line M1, again, our top performer, our star child. As we can see, again, steady cost, steady flow of cost with now the differences that we are not operating in Sundays. And if we look at the weekdays and at the month, we can see the same exact values. Now in Saturdays, of course, because we are not operating in Sundays, and in August. We are finding some huge variance given by seasonal reasons. When we analyze the profit, this variance is as clear as possible. We can see the drops right in summer vacation right now, Easter holidays, and also in some kind of special days such as October 12th, the Día de la Hispanidad. And here in this screen, what you are going to see is how the TFR affects the profit and the average passengers per euro. Again, doing some random filtering just to showcase the true power of what we are, or what we design. In line M1, we can see an excellent profit and a pretty bad TFR, which seemed contradictory, but I will explain it when we analyze line 34. And this is key. Why is this key? Well, it's because, as you can see, the profit in orange is pretty bad, it's 5.4, but the TFR is excellent, it's 0.55. Why, if the bus is empty, half empty, we have such a bad performance? And I just want you to do an imaginative exercise here. If we take the first bus and we make it so full, it's not physically possible to, take any other passenger, the passengers queuing in the bus stop are going to have to wait. If they wait too much, they will say, okay, I have places to go, let me take a taxi, let me take the metro, let me call my friend and take the, his car. And when the next bus arrives, it's completely empty. Thus, and this is the median, not the average, so this is kind of, happening right now. This is why it's so important to understand that the TFR and the frequency, we will see later, it's key to have an optimized network. Finally, let me skip it here. We can see how the what if analysis, right here you have the profit. Now we are going to check what happens if I, make buses more full, increasing the TFR to a number of 2. The profit plummets. Then, okay, let's take a more optimal case. What happens if I tell it go to 1? It kind of, goes back, but it goes to the sweet spot. In the exact moment, it arrives to 1.2, more or less. Why? Because, again, it's kind of better to have a more full bus, right, than an empty bus or an overcrowded bus. But we can always tweak capacity a little bit. Now what I'm going to show is what happens when we go from the average distance of 8 kilometers to an average distance of 2 kilometers. So I just say one random number starting by 2, and we can see how the profit skyrockets. Why? We will analyze it. It's because, of course, when we have a lower distance, we can do more trips. And this increases the satisfaction of the client because now, as doing more trips, the frequency of the bus increases, buses are not as full, and more demand can be supplied. The main issues, again, just to summarize, are the increased demands, which we are not supplying. Why? Mainly because it's seasonal, meaning we have huge variance within the same day, right, the same week, and the same month. This, of course, means we are overspending and underspending respectively, meaning investing a lot of resources when we don't need them and not investing enough resources when we actually need them. And, of course, this affects the fundamental frequency, which means that buses are either too overcrowded or too empty to correctly work. So, okay, Alonso, you have been for now, like 12 minutes of complaining about the network. Please give us some solution, right? Well, we have not one solution, but one proposal. And what do we propose? We propose microlines. What are microlines? I will explain right now, but for the moment, we have to understand that microlines, like line M1, are our top performers. Line M1 is our top performing, and the other microline, line M3, is in the top 20. Why microlines? Well, because they are small, which means less fixed cost, and means that they can traverse high-density districts, such the ones in the city center, with ease, and they can do more trips because they have a small distance, right? The route is not more than 2.5 kilometers on the average. Also, they are electric, which means we are cutting a lot of costs in the variable cost section because we are not using more gasoline. We are using electricity, which is cheaper. And they are ubicated in high-density districts, both in population and in movement, meaning a lot of people traverse the districts of Madrid city center. And this is not a strange solution for the EMT. They have invested a lot of money in Bicimad, which is, the electric bike service, and in the zero-emission lines. So this is not completely alien to EMT philosophy, but we are not living here because we have analyzed the city council data and proposed 8 new lines to be constructed over the next 5 years with an estimated cost of 2.5 million euros and transporting an annualized average of 6 million passengers. We have done these calculations with their actuals, right, on the float cost and on the human resources cost, and we have estimated the 6 million passengers thanks to such regression model that we have previously fine-tuned using the EMT's data cluster. So, is this it? are you going to be finally free before I switch to Spanish? No, not yet, because we have now to understand the next steps. See, our group does not want to live here. We really think on the capacity of our product. So we have thought about the initiative Madrid, Spain, Europe. Why? Because our product is replicable. We can do this in other kinds of cities, right? We can extract insights almost automatically from a varied kind of sources. Then, because it's profitable. Because microlines are thought to be cost-effective as they are small, low cost, and electric, and because they work exceptionally well in touristic areas. And both Spain and Europe have a lot of touristic cities. Finally, of course, because we are in the 21st century, we have to talk about responsibility. Boosting eco-mobility helps with the 2030 plan here in Spain and helps with the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, especially Goal 11, which is, again, green infrastructure in Europe. So we achieved a low-cost, sustainable, and quality-wise good enough solution for not only this particular use case in Madrid, but also potentially in the next 7 years, Bilbao, Sevilla, Barcelona, and in the next 10 years, if this project, flourished, Brussels, Amsterdam, Luxembourg, Rome, etc., etc. So this is the reason I ask you, the public, to take a good choice, to choose wisely, and to choose touring transit as the new way of reinvent transportation. Thank you so much for being here. Si me dais un momento, pego un trago al agua y ahora le damos al español. Bueno, pues de vuelta, y siento por repetirme, me vais a oír ahora mucho repetirme, pero en mi lengua madre. Lo primero, de vuelta, agradecer a alumnos, profesores y empresas por darnos la oportunidad de estar aquí, por darnos la oportunidad de investigar, por darnos la oportunidad de pensar en cómo podemos hacer no solo un Madrid mejor, sino, como ya hemos visto y como llegaremos de vuelta, una España mejor y una Europa mejor, más verde, más sostenible y más óptima para conocer y mejorar la calidad de los servicios que ofrece. Nosotros somos Touring Transit, un proyecto colaborativo con SAS. Lo que hemos hecho ha sido obtener una información crítica y es la red puede mejorarse y ansiosos de hacerlo hemos decidido dar nuestra mejor oportunidad a mejorarla. ¿Cómo? Gracias al poder de la analítica y al poder de los servicios cloud, hemos creado, gracias a los datos que nos entregó SAS sobre el funcionamiento de la red, dos soluciones que funcionan en tándem, como hemos dicho antes, una mano estratégica y una mano táctica. En la mano táctica hemos creado, gracias a las herramientas en cloud, una herramienta tipo Software as a Service, la cual sirve para hacer en cualquier momento concreto, una evaluación completa del estado de salud de la red de transportes, pudiendo identificar fácilmente problemas gracias a sus 4 pestañas principales. El análisis rápido de los Key Performance Indicators, el análisis temporal de la demanda y de los costes variables, el análisis del beneficio mediano y también de la tasa de llenado de los camiones y, finalmente, una página que permite evaluar la regresión del beneficio neto que produce la red, un beneficio neto, por supuesto, definido como una combinación entre el número de pasajeros cuya demanda ha sido suplida, el coste por el que ha sido hecho y cuán llenos iban los autobuses a la hora de hacerlo, para poder evaluar cómo de efectiva estaba siendo la red en su acción concreta. Evidentemente, en esta parte de regresión también entran todo el planeamiento, el plan a futuro, ¿verdad? La capacidad de, antes de tomar una decisión, evaluar cuáles son los costes predichos para ella. Y por la otra mano, en la mano estratégica, hemos avanzado un poco más y con nuestra propia herramienta hemos pensado en generar una solución para la red, no justo para ahora, no para quedarnos con pan para hoy y hambre para mañana, sino para los próximos 3, 5, 7 años. ¿Y qué es aquello que deseamos hacer? Bustear la capacidad de suplir demanda de la red gracias al uso de líneas microeléctricas. ¿Por qué? Porque son pequeñas, porque no incurren en tanto coste ni fijo ni variable, porque tienen una mayor maniobrabilidad y porque pueden realizar más viajes supliendo todavía más demanda en un mismo día, haciendo que en zonas críticas de la ciudad de Madrid, tanto por su densidad poblacional como por su densidad de movimiento, de nuevo les ruego en un ejercicio imaginativo comprender el centro de Madrid como una zona en la que todos los movimientos norte, sur, este, oeste y en cualquier dirección cardinal necesariamente cruzan por él. Estas características hacen que una microlínea sea la mejor solución, coste-beneficio, por supuesto, para nuestra ciudad. Hemos propuesto nuevas 8 microlíneas, hemos hecho una estimación de los costes, repito brevemente, unos 6 millones de pasajeros transportados en el primer año a un coste promediado de 2,5, incluyendo el coste de adquirir nueva flota. Y hemos decidido no solo quedarnos ahí, hemos decidido, si esto funciona para Madrid, si verdaderamente tenemos un producto que es replicable, que es adaptable y que puede ser escalado, ¿por qué no moverlo al resto de ciudades? ¿Por qué, pudiendo generar solo beneficio aquí en nuestra ciudad natal, no podemos llevarlo a tantas otras? De ahí nuestros pasos futuros, que sería replicar este análisis para otras ciudades, en la iniciativa que hemos llamado Madrid, España, Europa. Madrid, España, Europa trataría de, en los próximos 5 años, a la implementación de dichas líneas en Madrid, llevarlas a Barcelona, realizar el análisis ahí, trazar las líneas concretas que podrían dar más beneficio y repetir dicha acción en Bilbao, en Sevilla, y posteriormente no quedarnos en España, llegar también al resto del mundo, llegar también a lo que sería Bruselas, Ámsterdam, Luxemburgo, Roma incluso, para poder, con estas líneas que son replicables, con un buen coste, que cubren esa demanda, satisfacen esa calidad y, más importante, que son verdes, para poder entrar como una insignia del movimiento español, madrileño y europeo, darnos a conocer y no detenernos en lo que sería la excelencia local, sino intentar llegar a la internacional en una ambiciosa propuesta. Es por ello que yo a vosotros, público, empresas, profesores incluso, les pido que la próxima vez tomen el bus, que tomen también la decisión correcta y que tomen Turing Transit como el ejemplo europeo que puede revitalizar la red de transportes a día de hoy y en los años futuros. Muchísimas gracias por su atención.
Okay, muchas gracias. Vamos con el siguiente. El título es Retrieval, Augmented Generation System for Real World Applications. Lo han realizado Lucía Cuevas, Alejandro Sánchez, Irina Vela y Daniel Toribio. Y lo han hecho en colaboración con Fiverr. Adelante.
Esto no está... Ah, vale. So, good morning everyone. Today I speak on behalf of the Retrieval Augmented Generation System for Real-World Applications project done in collaboration with Fiverr. First of all, what is Fiverr? Fiverr is a company which provides a live entertainment discovery platform where they connect users with a variety of experience focused on social events, allowing them to purchase tickets. So where does this project come from? Well, the number of events and users keeps growing non-stop. This demands Fiverr a continuous improvement of their recommendation models for providing accurate and personalized suggestions in the user feed. But is there any problem with the actual recommendation models? Well, traditional recommendation models, such as collaborative filtering or content-based approach, for example, keep playing a crucial role across various top industries like e-commerce or social media. However, they often rely too much on predefined user items, matrix, and while being effective, they struggle with some issues as the cold start, lack of context in their recommendations, sparsity problems in their data, over-specialization, meaning repetitive and redundant recommendations, popularity bias, and overall the inability to adapt to rapidly changing preference or trends that users follow. So what do we propose? Well, in this project, we have gone through different situations of recommendations for Fiverr plans, and we have explored the potential of a solution based on AI, in particular RAG models. But what is a RAG model? Well, a RAG model is an AI architecture that basically performs two actions, that is information retrieval and text generation. It's composed by three components, which is an external base of knowledge, which can be updated, then a retriever, which retrieves information from this base of knowledge based on a query, and a reader that creates responses to queries based on this relevant information retrieved by the retriever. Why this solution? Well, this model not only overcomes traditional recommending systems by dealing with all the previous mentioned challenges, but also overcomes purely generative systems which might create outdated data or not real information. This system stands out for its adaptability and the generative component that can justify the recommendations in a natural language, which enhance the user trust and engagement. Once in context, let's dive into our development. Follow the steps we followed. First, the creation of the base of knowledge. We were given two datasets, one related with the events, where we want to highlight the columns for the title of the plan, the description, and the keywords, and one of like a user interaction record, where we want to highlight the action column, where we can see if the plan was purchased or just viewed. The base of knowledge has two main components. One is the page content, which is the concept of the event, the textual information that is going to be checked for the similarity search against the query. And then the metadata that is more of a supplementary data useful for retrieving the original event in the afterwards of the project, of the search. Here we had two proposals, two lines of work. One used the full description as page content. Pros, it doesn't lose any piece of information. Cons, it has a lot of noise because it's with the string of the description is using the full web page text. And the other line of work is using a variable created by us, which is mixed title words and keyword words. Pros is the conceptual best definition of an event because it's short and concise. Cons, it has to deal with the unbalanced problem we had with keywords because in the range was from having events with just one keyword and having events with up to 32 keywords. The following step was chunking. In this case, for the description line of work, we used the recursive character text splitter from LangChain. It's a character-based splitter that either use a 256 size for creating the chunks or markdown separators that were in the original descriptions, and we use them. The thing here is that other deprecated alternatives were semantic splitter or other sizes, but there are common sentences in all the descriptions that if they make to be a full chunk, they can link different events mistakenly. The other line of work, the keywords and title, did not use chunking because we can control the length of the variable we created because it was created by separating the title words and the keywords by a frequency criteria in different specificity levels. And we extract always the first more specific levels, so stop words and more general terms do not get retrieved. Then we get to the embedding model. We use a multilingual embedding model because it's very important to understand that Fiverr is an international company, and in our datasets we had up to 12 languages, and we didn't want to make a language separation because it was raising barriers to the model that are unnecessary. Then we throw the different embeddings into the vectorial space. Here you can see the difference between the description line of work and the keywords line of work in the embedding space. We use the cosine similarity metric for the similarity search, and we use just a face database. We arrive to the first important component of the RAG model, which is the retriever. A retriever basically works with receiving an input, a query, passing the retriever, and getting the top K relevant events. Here, the potential of the RAG as a recommender begins because we construct automatic query generators for the different use cases, from more simple logics as a similar event recommendation, where we just get the keywords from the anchor event and throw it into the query, to more complex queries, as for example, the complementary event, where we don't not only take the anchor event keywords, we also search in a time window from the purchase of that event, other events purchased in a co-occurrence, get those keywords if they surpass a minimum co-occurrence threshold, meaning it's not just a one-time match, and then use also the keywords of that co-occurrent event to search for more similar events in the full event database for surpassing the challenge of popularity bias, so all the events have a word, and throw all those keywords into a query and get a complementary event, which is not an easy task. Here is an example of a metric we develop. We have to understand that developing a metric, the ultimate metric of this model is the user's feedback and the fiber success. It's not easy to create a metric that tries to predict, given a user's record, just dividing it into training and testing, the testing part, because we are missing so much context of the user record. We don't know if the training events have been as events for only one person, 2 people, a group, and it was inefficient to perform a metric like that. So we opt for an auto-accuracy metric, which it basically means that it checks if we are able to retrieve the same event from the information we extract from that event, meaning that the retrieval approach is correct and that we are heading the right direction. We have a more strict version which checks that a direct match between the retrieve event and the original event, and a more relaxed version which just checks the keywords, so similar events scores. This is important, the interpretation of these metrics, because the extract metric, it is above 0, it means that we are heading the right direction, because this metric depends a lot on the number of events the retrieval retrieves. Because on the top 100 events retrieved, the standard deviation of the cosine similarity is insignificant. And for the keyword A1, we have to understand that, for example, the original event having cinema and food, and the predicted event having cinema and burger, conceptually are similar, are the same, but not technically. Here, after the retriever, we get to the reader part, which is the full potential of the recommendation. Basically, it's in charge of creating the prompt from an LLM, and it has 2 templates, the system templates, which assign the role to the LLM, and then states the format we want the answer, and the user templates, which in this case receives a context, which are all the events retrieved from the retriever, and then the query we are looking to answer. Here we have many tools, and one of them was the re-ranker that I'm going to explain through the cold start use case. We make a variance of the cold start that instead of making the line the lack of interactions from unknown users to well-known users, we use the lack of information. We create a database for user profiling, and because we can have users that have a lot of record, but always select the same events, so we don't have much information from that users. In this case, these users are treated as beginner users, so they are recommended as they are new users to Fiverr. What are they recommended? They are recommended proven successful events. How? Well, this ranker allows us to reorder the retrieve order of the events by, for example, adding artificial score punctuation we create, and that throw it into the context prompt for the LLM. Another very important tool itself are the templates. They can be explained, for example, through the user historic use case. Users with a long record have a lot of topics to take into account for the query, but those topics may not be balanced in the event database, meaning that, for example, Italian restaurants have more representation than escape rooms. This is solved through an adequate role template for the system. We order the system to, instead of recommending the best plans, to analyze the topics that it detects from a list of all the events, and then extract the best event for each topic, balancing the problem of representation. Finally, the best tool we developed was a chatbot. This chatbot was created through 2 LLMs. We used Zephyr for the generative or discriminative questions and the final recommendation, and we use Flanty5 for the binary classification problem of relevant events or not relevant based on the answers given to these discriminative questions. This cannot be adapted to every use case, but for example, to the historic use case, we run the retrieve, but instead of using the re-ranker or using a prompt directly to the LLM, we pass it through this question and answer model. So through the questions, we are filtering relevant plans and making smaller the relevant set of plans until it's a certain size, and then we create their final recommendation. This can also be used for addressing the pure cold start use case. For example, if we have a really new user, we can show him an interface where he can choose between the unique keywords we have. So we get the user specific likes, and then just follow the same pipeline as in the user historical case with the chatbot. Get the retrieve, and with the question and answer models, get a final recommendation. This journey has highlighted the potential of RAG as a recommendation model. Why? Mainly because of three things. First, the pipeline structure it follows that allows to automatize different use cases within the same model, not needing other models. Then the adaptability to complex logic for different use cases with its own tools, not needing third parties or nothing. And finally, the use of LLMs. LLMs are an evolving technology that can enhance RAG because they are continuously upgrading, so can RAG also continuous upgrade. Then the future steps we will take if we continue in this project will be search for alternatives for cosine similarity and page content, searching for latent distribution in data, then alternatives for actual LLMs that we use, for example, as an alternative, the GPT family model, and then expand the dataset with more attributes for user and event profiling, and very important, creating a semi-automatic testing framework, because here all the testing was done manually, and it was a hard job. In conclusion, with all these improvements, we firmly believe that a RAG application as a recommender model can become a cutting-edge recommender in the future. Thank you. Y bueno, ahora un pequeño repaso en español de todo lo explicado. Nuestro proyecto al final es explorar el potencial de utilizar modelos de generación aumentada por recuperación para aplicaciones en el mundo real, como en este caso puede ser la de recomendadores de eventos gracias a la base de conocimiento de Fiverr. Ha sido un problema más de investigación y en este caso, por mencionar los pasos que hemos seguido, lo primero es crear esa base de conocimiento de la que vamos a recuperar un conocimiento actualizado, de la que partíamos de dos datasets, uno de eventos y otro de interacciones de usuarios, y con eso creamos el componente de page content, que es el componente importante dentro de la base de conocimiento, ya que es el que se mira para buscar la similaridad entre los distintos eventos y la query que lanzamos al modelo. Pasaron por un proceso de chunking, en este caso la línea de trabajo de keywords y de título no, la línea de trabajo de descripción sí, cada uno con sus pros y con sus contras, en un caso ruido, en otro puede ser la falta de información. Entonces utilizamos un modelo de embeddings multilingüal porque es muy importante. Fiverr al final es una compañía internacional y las descripciones de los eventos además tienen muchos anglicismos y términos en otros idiomas, entonces la separación no es un método viable. Después lanzábamos estos embeddings al espacio vectorial, un espacio vectorial con files, y utilizamos la métrica de coseno, de la similaridad de coseno para buscar los eventos similares. Llegamos al primer componente importante, que es el retriever, el recuperador, donde el potencial del RAG como recomendador empieza. Hemos presentado dos casos de uso, el más sencillo, como puede ser la búsqueda de un evento similar, que utiliza sencillamente sus palabras clave, o un caso de uso más complejo, como puede ser la búsqueda del complementario, ¿no? Utilizando esas keywords de eventos del evento ancla, de los eventos que hemos considerado que son coocurrentes y al final de los eventos similares a los coocurrentes para evitar ese sesgo de popularidad. Esto nos demuestra que en el retriever, gracias a la construcción de constructores, valga la redundancia, de queries automáticos, podemos implementar lógicas muy complejas. Mencionábamos brevemente el tema de métricas. Al final, la métrica que define el performance del modelo es el feedback de los usuarios y el éxito de Fiverr como plataforma recomendadora. Sí que hemos podido implementar esa métrica de autoprecisión, de demostrar que estamos entendiendo bien lo que es un evento y retrieveando la información importante del evento por lo que el modelo nos puede devolver el propio evento, no utilizando el set entero de información, que sería usar el título, la descripción y las keywords en uno. Y ya llegamos al componente final, que era el reader, donde ya se volvía exponencial el potencial del RAG como un recomendador a través de diferentes herramientas, como es el re-ranker, que reordenaba ese orden que nos devolvía el recuperador de eventos de importancia con un orden que nosotros quisiésemos darle, por ejemplo, en el caso de Callstar, con un orden balanceado entre popularidad y relevancia del evento. Luego también el propio prompt que le lanzamos al LLM, donde podemos establecer qué queremos que haga, y como demostramos en el caso de uso del histórico, que le decíamos que en vez de que nos devolviese eventos relevantes, que nos devolviese los tópicos que él encontraba en todo el record, en todo el historial de un usuario, y luego posteriormente podíamos usar esos tópicos o para hacer otra iteración del modelo o sencillamente para ir sacar los top eventos de cada tópico. Y finalmente la herramienta más compleja, que sin ningún caso ha sido el chatbot, donde a través de 2 LLMs combinados podíamos hacer un modelo de preguntas y respuestas, donde a través de las preguntas íbamos reduciendo el set de eventos relevantes para dicha query, y que se podía aplicar no solo al caso de uso del Callstar y el histórico, como hemos visto, se puede aplicar a cualquier caso de uso. En conclusión, creemos que el modelo, la aplicación real de un modelo de RAG como recomendador es algo bastante viable, y gracias a su componente que utiliza LLMs, seguro que va a evolucionar hacia un top performance recomendador sin lugar a dudas. Aprovechar este momento para agradecer a Marina, a Carlos y a Marc, los mejores tutores que un equipo ha podido tener, y a mis compañeros Lucía, Irina y Daniel por un muy buen ambiente de trabajo y unos muy buenos resultados. Muchas gracias.
Pues muchas gracias a vosotros y vamos con el siguiente. El siguiente, el último de esta primera parte de la sesión. Vamos con un poquito de retraso. El título es Sales Forecasting with Machine Learning, y el trabajo ha sido realizado por Ana Real, Olga Bonachera, Francisco José Landa y Alejo González, y lo han hecho en colaboración con Sandoz. Cuando queráis.
Okay, so good morning everyone, I'm Curro, and these are my mates Alejo, Ana and Olga, and today we will talk about sales forecasting with machine learning. Before we start, I would like to thank our links at Sandoz, like David, Juan and Carlos, for their extensive coaching and support, and of course to Javier Nogales, who has been keeping an eye on all our developments. So we've got a lot of things to talk about. I will try to be very brief, and we will start with a very small pitch recap. Basically, for those who missed our pitch presentation, let me introduce you to Sandoz. It's basically a biotech company. They sell biosimilar medicine and generics. Basically, our goal is, I think the title is pretty self-explanatory, we want to predict sales, forecast sales with advanced machine learning algorithms. Our work is based purely on time series analysis, which of course is fundamental to understand. The key concepts you need to take today from this presentation is basically that time series can have trends, can have seasonality, can have residuals like noise, and they have outliers, which are very, very harmful for any model you want to apply to them. Of course, we've got, as I said, many models, ranging from the most simple ones, like ARIMA, SORIMA, which are purely statistical models, to those very advanced models focused on usually trees, and of course we can end up on the beautiful world of neural networks. all this is merged, is joined using the darts library, which is great to work with in order to develop time series models. Again, as we were very new to this time series world, we had to study a lot and to test our initial beliefs in a kind of sandbox environment. For this, we used the M5 Kaggle competition dataset, which is basically sales across Walmart in the US. We got a small example of the structure of the dataset and a bit snippet. It was very useful when jumping onto the real data, which has this structure. We've got countries, we've got molecules, dosage form, strengths, the standard units, which is the value we want to predict, and the date, of course, essential in time series. Here's a small EDA on the data. We were able to predict up until molecule level, so we have country, molecule. We stayed there because if not, we needed to build like thousands of models, which of course were quite complex, let me tell you. So this is a small example of the data at a level country. We've got 4 countries with their respective sales. Here we really don't notice very much the trend of the time series, but I think if you can see, yeah, you can see pretty well the plot. We've got 2020, an outlier. Oh my God. We need to deal with outliers. As you said, they are very harmful. If we focus a little bit more on one of the countries, we can see here more things. We can see clear trends, we can see clear seasonality, and of course, outliers. In order to start working with this end of data, we needed to pre-process a lot the data. We start with a kind of simple pipeline. We decompose the series into their key components, trend, seasonality, and noise. We then got beautiful, deeper insights on how the data was distributed, if we could use one model to predict all of them, if we needed more models, one model per series. So this enabled us to get great performance. This is an example of the components classification. We can see the trend, seasonality, and the residuals. And on your right-hand side, you can see our resulting analysis on the series. We've got the per country molecule, the trend, if it went upwards, downwards, or if it remained stable, the noise, if it was very noisy, not noisy, the seasonality, clear seasonal patterns or not, and a small clustering we did in order to, again, gain insights on the data. Again, outliers, I've been saying this a lot of times, outliers are terrible for models. We had, once we removed all the outliers, we gained a 20% performance comparing it with the previous models. Here in the plot, you can see 4 red points. I think the COVID points are obvious. We all knew there were going to be some kind of weird stuff around those dates. But also, take a look and see the other red points, the other 2 red points. They are not a clear outlier, so we needed to deal with them. We have 2 ways of dealing with outliers, the Z-score, a more statistical approach, and isolation forest, which the name is quite self-explanatory. We try to isolate the outliers using trees, random splitting the dataset until we get the outliers isolated. So once we find these outliers, we had to handle them. I think all my colleagues here of the degrees will remember these words, interpolation methods, maybe from the numerical methods subject. We had to, of course, deal with these outliers. We could just forget about them, remove them, input the average, the median, but the most nice approach, of course, was to interpolate the points, because if we just remove or input a fake value, again, the model was going to be harmed. This is the result of our pipeline. We classified using both Z-score and isolation forest. We added a small bit of noise to, again, avoid overfitting, and used the RMSE, MAE, and MAPE metrics to evaluate our results. So this is the resulting series. Focus, of course, on 2020. We can see a small purple dashed line that softens the curve. So once the pre-processing was all done, this was quite hard, we had a lot of models to test that proved to be great with the M5 dataset, and we imported them thus to Sandoz. We got the SMA, which is basically the linear regression for time series, and we use this model as a benchmark to see how good or how bad the other models performed. Then we jumped onto exponential smoothing, which is a smoothing method, of course, as the name says. Basically, decreases weights as we go to the past, so we give more importance to recent values. Of course, it has different ways, different approaches. So we focus on an approach that had trends and seasonalities very deep into the algorithm. So then we went to random forest. I think we have all heard about random forest. And then XGBoost and LightGBM, which are both like the stronger, cooler, and basically better cousin of random forest. They are all tree-based methods with a gradient boosting, and each one of them has its own unique way of treating the trees to get, of course, the best possible model. So our approach was to develop a package of functions because we had to train 36 models, each and one of them differently with their things. We need to check results, we need to see if everything was going well, so we developed a very, very big package of functions, which was, of course, great for our work. In fact, we tried to do a grid search for each and one of the models, which was impossible. We tried to do a very, very simple grid search, and it jumped quickly to 2 million models to train, which was unfeasible with our little computers. So here's an example of first training. We can see that the 3 models on your right-hand side are a random forest, LightGBM, and XGBoost, proved to be very strong. So we said, hey, why don't we add an ensemble method with these 3 top methods? Here we got it. It usually performs, if not the best, it's very, very close to the next best, which is usually the XGBoost. And in order to build the final model, we had to choose. We cannot just use all the models and say, hey, I have 7 different predictions. No, we did an evaluator, and the model that got the best average results was the winner. Here we got predictions for our first split. We've got data up until mid-2022, and we did the predictions up until early 2024. And as the subject was going on, and we were proving some results to the Sanders guys, they gave us more recent data, so we can test our models with newer samples. Here we can look, we can see that the model is pretty decent. Let me tell you, this is a great prediction. Usually, all the series are pure chaos, pure noise, pure randomness, so it's quite hard to get a decent result. If we take a look for the second split, this is early 2024, we get a better result. It's now we failed, but less than 1 million units, which when we are talking about tens of millions of units being sold, it's a pretty decent result. And if we focus on the last split, we just nailed it. We predict our sales, so job done. The next step of our model, which will be we predict at a very high level, just molecule. We would like to focus on dosage form and even strength, but as I told you, we get a lot of models to train, a lot of grid search to do, a lot of parameters to take into account, and so on. A funny limitation of our work is that at the end, we don't know if the market is going to go up, it's going to go down, it's going to go in circles. So just focusing on data is useless when we don't have business insight and a very good look at the market. What are your competitors doing? What is happening in the world? So it's very important. Here, for example, our prediction is the yellow line, which is a bit higher than it should be. But if we look at the red dashed line, we see that the values very close to it are just a wall. So our model thinks, well, this may be an outlier. So we just stay up. Wasn't the case. And again, another example, this one is a bit more illustrating. Even in our last meeting with the Sanders guys, they say, hey, what is happening here? This molecule was very weird. So we got an uptrend, suddenly plumped sales, we go slowly up again, and our prediction was that it would still be growing slowly, but suddenly we find a wall, and our model just can't handle these very complex patterns. Entonces, a modo de resumen, hemos hablado de muchas cosas, hemos tenido que aprender prácticamente series temporales desde cero, ya que en la carrera pues, nos faltaba ese empujoncito. Una vez nos entramos un poquito de cómo iba la cosa, nos aventuramos con el dataset del M5, que es una petición de Kaggle, para probar, ver qué estaba pasando, ver que también nos manejábamos con los datos, con las series, entendíamos lo que estaba pasando, no entendíamos nada. Una vez teníamos todo más o menos asentado, saltamos a los datos de Sanders, que eran mucho más complejos, mucho más complicados de trabajar, y nada. Clasificamos series, las descompusimos en sus factores básicos, tratamos outliers, que fue también un reto, entrenamos, ajustamos y afinamos los modelos, creamos los ensembles y demás, y evaluamos las predicciones pues, con datos muy recientes. Así que, hecho, hemos podido predecir exitosamente series temporales, en este caso ventas de fármacos con Machine Learning, y hemos podido analizar y hacer un poco de introspección con las limitaciones de nuestro trabajo. Así que en la ultimísima reunión que tuvimos antes de ayer con los chicos de Sandoz, nos preguntaron, hey, ¿han conseguido mejorar realmente el utilizar una media? Bueno, yo creo que una imagen vale más que 1000 palabras y me apetece ponerla en grande. A su derecha tienen una media móvil, lo que sería poner ahí la media de decir, venga, pues el año pasado vendí 7, pues este año voy a vender 7. Pues claro, el RMSE, que es un dato que solemos trabajar mucho en general, salta casi a 17 millones en error y nosotros somos capaces de bajarlo a 3,7, prácticamente reducir 5 veces el error. O sea, es un dato espectacular. Así que nada, muchas gracias por su atención, esperamos que les haya gustado.
Muy bien, pues gracias a todos. Hacemos aquí la parada y vamos a recortar un poquito el café. Volvemos a 1:15, ¿de acuerdo? Es decir, tenemos aproximadamente 20 minutos. Salimos, no es en la cafetería, sino en el hall que hay al lado, ¿vale? Una cosa, perdón, los equipos que tienen que presentar después, que no hayan descargado su presentación, que lo hagan ahora, ¿vale? Muy bien, pues retomamos la sesión. El siguiente proyecto tiene por título Solar Forecasting, ML Prediction for Radiation and Energy Demand. Lo han realizado Daniel Galrón, Carlos Casanova, Ricardo Vázquez, Eduardo González, Xi Xiao, y lo han hecho en colaboración con Enfoque. Así que, adelante.
No me he traído la botella, así que no hay pausa dramática. We are Ricardo, Daniel, Carlos, Shaw, who's already left us for Singapore, and he's already went to Singapore. And me, Eduardo, and we're going to present our project on solar forecasting, ML predictions for radiation and energy demand, which we did in collaboration with Enfoque, who are here represented by Vanessa and David, and some collaboration with Jacobo. First of all, a foreword about Enfoque. You probably haven't heard much about them. They're quite a recent company, created in 2010. They're a consulting firm. They're one of the fastest growing companies in that area with 100% Spanish capital. They've got more than 1,000 employees and work in several countries. And a testimony of that growth is that they are working with the university in this capacity for the first time. And we do hope that our work and their relationship with us will incline them to come back next year. So a bit of a roadmap. First, I'm going to present project case and objectives. And then I'm going to show you the data set Enfoque provides us and what we did with it. And then our two main tasks, forecasting and regression, which I'll explain now. And finally, dashboard and some afterwards. So I don't think anyone can deny the importance of incorporating renewable energies into national power grids. They're good for, in terms of climate change, as well as having minute costs compared to traditional methods of energy production. But it does have an inconvenience, which is that since energy cannot be stored in large quantities, it has to be produced on demand. The problem is that renewable energies, we cannot simply decide when we can use them because they are dependent on many variables. We cannot decide when the sun shines, when the sea is going to rise or drop. So we have to be able to do two things. First, predict when we're going to need that energy, and second of all, predict how much energy we can produce from those renewable sources. In our case, it's solar energy. And that's what Enfoque proposed us to do. First of all, we would have to predict energy demand based on the data set they gave us. And second of all, perform a sort of a regression task to study the relationship between several climatic variables and a variable that stands for essentially the power production received from a photovoltaic plate. Finally, because we are working with a consulting firm, selling oneself to the client is always important, so we have to create a visual tool that can really explain what we have done in an attractive way. So first of all, the data set they provided us has 13 different variables and 182,122 observations, which are a lot. We have clearly identified the two targets we're going to need for both our tasks, which are GHI, stands for general horizontal irradiance. You can think of it as the amount of power a photovoltaic plate receives from the sun's irradiance, and energy delta, which is the change in energy consumption over time. And then we have a host of different climatic variables, which are pretty self-explanatory. Some are numeric, temperature, pressure, and some are categorical, like sunlight time, day length is sun, which is a binary variable, which informs us of whether it's daytime or nighttime. Finally, we have weather type that classifies those weather conditions into 5 different levels. So if we plot the, first of all, before we jumped into any of the actual work, we thought that it would be good to enrich the data set with information regarding economics, because we thought energy consumption does not only depend on the weather, it also depends on how much money people can spend and how much money we'll have to pay for electricity. Although, as we realized later, we didn't really need this information given that we were forecasting the time series, which it only uses as intake that one variable. So we plotted the data and we realized two things that are very important to both our tasks. First, the clear seasonality of the data. If you look at top left, we see that energy consumption has clear seasonal patterns. It grows toward the beginning of the year and drops by the end, and it's pretty consistent or dropping toward time, so it goes from the highest in December to a low in late November. And also the clear physical resemblance of GHI and the weather variables, whether it's a direct relationship, so with sunlight time, or an inverse relationship with humidity. This we can exploit with the regression task. When we plotted the data daily, we noticed something that was going to be very important, which is that if you notice, whenever the eastern variable is set to 0, which means that it's nighttime, both our targets are always 0. The rest of the variables are informed, but GHI and energy delta are 0. This means that we do not need to create some convoluted system to predict what our targets are going to be during the nighttime, and that essentially those observations which we recorded after, say, 8 o'clock are in fact noise, and we can drop from our data set. And then we also realized that the task we wanted to perform was not predicting with 15 minutes in advance, with half an hour in advance, like our data set is created. We have timestamps every 15 minutes. What we want to do is to be able to predict with days and even months ahead. This means that our data set has a granularity that is simply too much for the task at hand, and what we decided to do is do daily aggregations on the targets, so to know what the total GHI and what the total energy demand for a day during the daytime, remember we dropped those nighttime observations, are. And for the weather variables, the categorical ones, we did a mode to see what was the most common value. And for the numeric variables, what we did was perform an average. So once we have prepared our data set, we are now ready to jump into both our tasks. The first one, if you recall, is forecasting. What we're going to do in forecasting is we're going to try to predict ahead of time the value of energy delta, which is a time series. What we're going to do is we're going to produce, in essence, 3 models. The first one is a straightforward forecasting model using exponential smoothing. The other 2 are actually regression tasks adapted to this time series data. And we're going to compare them using the MAP metric, which stands for mean absolute percentage error. It essentially tells us how much a prediction varies with respect to the actual truth in terms of the size of that ground truth. So what we have to do first, using for our first forecasting model, we're going to have to do a seasonal decomposition. We have to study the shape, the trend, the seasonality of the data in order to decide whether our forecasting model is going to be additive or multiplicative in the season and trend. So if you notice, high in the, there you go. Here we can see a trend that is shifting over time. And if we calculate the period, you can see the seasonality is actually quite regular, but if we calculate the period, we notice that it isn't exactly a year. It's not 365 days. It's 357. This means that the seasons are shifting. So with this in mind, we decided to set both parameters to multiplicative, and now we can jump into optimizing the rest of the hyperparameters. Also, to prepare for the regression models, having a regression model allows you to compare different variables to see what mix of them generates the target best. And given that we're using a time series, it means that we only have one variable. But what we can do is generate extra variables using that same information as the original variable to introduce some nuisance in the system. For example, whether that particular day is, say, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, beginning of the year, whether it's a weekday or a weekend day. And with this, we created 5 new features which we would hope added more information into our models. So now we have to train our models. Notice that training a forecasting model is very punctuous because, first of all, we have to deal and potentially exploit the characteristics of the data, the dependencies of the time variable. And because we do not want to bias the testing, the training of the data set into the test. So what we do is we use that period we calculated to divide the data set into equal chunks. We leave the last chunk out to test, and to train and validate, we use the rest of the chunks using a method called expanding window, which allows us to incorporate even more training data and whilst using only one chunk to validate. So once we have fed, we're creating 4 models with the regressors. So one with the normal variables and the other one with the created variables we made. And then we're feeding into exponential smoothing, the regular forecaster, just the lagged values of energy delta. Once we tested them, once we trained, validated, and tested them, we could plot the results to identify which model was best following a couple of metrics. First of all, we're going to compare MAPE. Now, the way we thought of it was that we could establish a threshold MAPE to say that, okay, once a model reaches this threshold, it means it needs retraining. So what we were looking for is the model that takes the longest to reach that threshold. And that threshold, you can see, is 80% MAPE. And the one that takes the longest to get there is exponential smoothing. Now, you compare the evolution of the predictions with respect to the ground truth, we can notice that both regressors are getting the trend and seasonality quite properly, but they are smoothing the results, while exponential smoothing is tracking the variability of the actual data quite well. So we can determine that exponential smoothing is the best model, given that it has the highest life cycle and the best performance in terms of MEPE. So once we have settled this, we jump into regression. What we're doing in regression is that we're trying to build a model that will tell us the relationship between the different climatic variables and GHI. And what this in essence means is it will allow us to know, given a series of weather conditions, what the production of the solar energy can be expected. Similar to what we did with the forecasting, we realized that all our variables were exhibiting sort of the same patterns with some bit of difference. And what we thought was that we could create some new variables that could exploit those differences. We could reshape some distributions. We could use the definitions of those variables to create ones that were more informative to what we were trying to do. As is customary with this, we then used mutual information to get rid of those some variables because we were using in total 26. So we decided to set a threshold that would drop us about half of the variables in total, which meant that we were left with 16. Of those 16, 9 were variables we had created in the previous process. And once we have that, we can jump right into creating models. Now, we tested a lot of models, many more than you can see here, because we realized that each model is quite good at doing something else. In the end, what came out best was stacking. Now, stacking is not a straightforward model. Actually, what it does is it gets individual models and puts them together with a regularization term using ridge regression. So I should point out that since we have so many models, optimizing all of them and then comparing them was quite time-consuming and exploitative. So what we decided to do is compare the baselines, and then once we had a proper model, we would optimize that one. From what you can tell, we have 3 models plus a regularization term. Those are many hyperparameters to tune. So we decided to use a package called Optuna, which helped us in that process of optimizing automatically. And as you can see, the results are quite good. With an R-squared of 0.93, that's quite a fantastic result, actually. So once we have our results for the GHI and our forecast, we could create our interactive web app. What we want to show is what data we have used, and for one thing, say you can decide how many variables what the values of the weather variables are going to be, and what the expected return of GHI is going to be. And on the other hand, we will be able to plot the dale escape. ¿No deja reproducirlo? Pégalo ahí. Dale. Carlos. ¿De quién es? No va a dejar. Bueno, so in essence, what we would be able to see in that web app would be first selecting a series of variables, and then it would tell us what the power production would be. And for the forecasting model, we would be able to see ahead of time. We can decide how many days ahead we could select the model to show, and it will be able to tell us what that would be, so visually. So in conclusion, we reckon that all the objectives that were set by Enfoque were met. We had some limitations and things we think we can improve. Limitations, well, we were very dependent on the data set they gave us. Normally in real life what would happen is that we would have to develop a system to draw from information on real time. But since we were constrained to that data set and we did some pre-processing that we considered essential, we were left with quite a reduced number of observations, which would have helped in the training. But as we said, the overall result we are happy with. And also the computational power, as we said, we tested many different models, and using resources like GPUs or cloud services could help in the future develop our tools much more. And as a final afterword, as you may recall, the events of the past months, like the floods in Valencia, do stress the need of the tools like these that we have just explained in order to help deal with climate change and make ourselves independent of fossil fuels. So thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to do the explanation in Spanish. Esencialmente, el problema que tenemos es, por un lado, poder predecir la energía que se va a necesitar con varios días y meses de antelación, y por otro lado, saber cuánta energía vamos a poder recibir del Sol. Para el primer caso vamos a utilizar un sistema de forecasting de una variable indexada por tiempo, y para el segundo modelo una regresión. Enfoque nos dio un dataset con el que podríamos trabajar, aunque descubrimos que aproximadamente un tercio de las variables, aproximadamente un tercio de las observaciones que tenía eran ruido, porque estaban grabadas por la noche cuando ambos targets eran 0. Lo cual significa que podíamos quitar esas observaciones, quitarnos la variable ISAN, porque ya no haría ningún tipo de diferenciación, y también decidimos que como vamos a querer predecir con antelación de un par de meses, de días, tener observaciones cada 15 minutos no tenía mucho sentido. Lo que queremos es información diaria. Con lo tal, agregamos diariamente los datos, para los targets sumamos para los valores de todo el día, para las variables numéricas creamos medias y para las categóricas usamos la moda o la mediana. Una vez procesado el dataset, podemos hacer el forecasting de la variable. Creamos 3 modelos, uno de ellos es un simple forecasting, los otros 2 son modelos de regresión. Para los modelos de regresión intentamos crear variables nuevas a partir de la variable de consumición de energía, que nos permitiría a lo mejor introducir un poco más de información en el dataset, pero al final descubrimos que el mejor modelo es efectivamente uno que utiliza sencillamente la variable de energy consumption usando exponential smoothing. Para la regresión procedimos un poco similarmente, creamos variables nuevas que explotaran las diferencias y sutilezas dentro de la definición de cada variable. Utilizamos Mutual Information para determinar la relación de estas con GHI y poder quitarnos bastantes variables, porque teníamos 26. Una vez eso, desarrollamos varios modelos que comparamos con hiperparámetros en posición, o sea, el valor inicial. Y una vez tuvimos el mejor, que es en realidad una mezcla de modelos, podíamos optimizar ese utilizando un paquete que se llama Optuna. El desarrollo de la aplicación web, que desafortunadamente no habéis podido ver, nos permitiría, por un lado, introducir una serie de valores a las variables y decirnos qué producción de energética resultaría de la irradiación del Sol, y por otro lado nos permitiría ver qué va a ocurrir, cómo va a evolucionar la serie temporal de energía con hasta 357 días de antelación. Y eso es todo.
Muchas gracias. Vamos con el siguiente. El título es The Reality of Climate Change, Preventing Risks Through Data Analytics, Impacting the Insurance Industry. Lo han realizado Francisco Javier Molina, María Ángeles Magro, Alba María Pérez, Sergio Vizcaíno y Teresa Jenner. Y lo han realizado en colaboración con Blue Tab. Adelante.
¿Puedo darle aquí, no? En plan, si le doy aquí. Sí. Aquí hay como un poquito margen. Ok, para un ladito y para el otro. Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Alba and I'm here representing my team, which is made up with Sergio, Teresa, Maria, and Francisco. And we're going to talk about our project, The Reality of Climate Change, Preventing Risk Through Data Analytics Impacting the Insurance Industry. Well, first of all, I'm going to give you a bit of explanation, like the main motive that drove us through the project, which is the climate change. Climate change is a pressing issue in our society nowadays. It's obvious that we cannot deny it. The temperatures, as you can see in this graph, have been rising for the past years. And this is a problem because it affects the delicate balance of weather in our planet. As you can see in the other graphs, the natural disasters have been increasing in frequency, and not just frequency, but severity, which is a problem, and it's very concerning because also it's not just a region problem, but it's a global problem. Warmer oceans fuel more powerful storms, and higher atmospheric pressures lead to frequent while higher atmospheric temperatures intensify rainfall, causing more frequent flooding. But this is not the only challenge that we can encounter. There are a very diversity of, there are a lot of different natural disasters. It doesn't matter on their nature, if they're cyclones, tornadoes, storms, droughts, or wildfires. Everyone is unique, and it has to be treated differently. For example, with floods, there can be different reasons for them to happen, like intense rainfall or even snowmelt. All of this makes it a very difficult task to try and predict the natural disasters occurrence, and more if you take into account that we have to do it in advance. Because what do we want to do with this project? We want to give a tool for helping, preventing the risks, mitigating consequences, and giving a tool for basically saving lives. We are focusing on insurance companies, but it is something that can be used for all the society, the governments, and it can be basically used to save lives. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the project phases and how we structure the whole process. We started with data collection, then we went into data pre-processing, then we did the model development, we implemented the GIS viewer, and then we did some economic estimates. How did we distribute the work throughout the time? Okay, this is the final Gantt diagram representing how we worked, but it is very different from the initial one that we had. Let's say it was just very optimistic. We found a lot of challenges. We had taken some time into account so that we could reschedule, but there were some tasks like merging the data set that would take us more time than what we expected. And we had to adapt throughout time to be able to accomplish the objectives of the project, and we had to reprioritize throughout time what we were going to focus on. As you can see, the 5 phases here are distributed in such a way that the tasks that we were doing were overlapping so that everyone will be working simultaneously and we would not be having any delays. Also, on the other hand, we will be making the constant project documentation to be registering everything that we were doing. Okay, the data collection. Which data sources have we used? Which is the scope of the project? Which main challenges have we faced? We used 4 different databases, okay? We have the MDAT, which has, it's a database with 16,000 disasters from all over the world, from 2000 to the present, and it has every variable related to human impact, societal impact, economic impact, like number of affected people, number of deaths, total damage, insured damage. And then we had the climate variables databases, which were Copernicus, NOAA, and Meteostat, which included where we retrieve from the variables like temperature, precipitation, winds, etc. So how did we define the scope of the project? We started with the first analysis of the MDAT database, and we extracted some key points. As you can see on the slide, storms, earthquakes, floods cause the most significant damage globally. America experienced the highest economic impact, and storms and floods are the most frequent disasters in the USA. Therefore, America was one of our options to be chosen as the region for study. And inside America, we decided to go with the 6 different states of USA, because when we looked at the data, it was one of the more complete data with less missing values, which would facilitate our project. And also, we had to take into account how much time we will be taking the data from, and we decided that 2010 was a good option because it allow us to capture the periodicity and the patterns that could be inherently in the data so that our model could be working better. So one of the challenges we had is that we had to change where we were retrieving the data from. Our first approach was combining MDAT with Copernicus. As I said, MDAT has different variables that are like more societal information, and then we use the Copernicus for the climate variables. The problem was that MDAT had a lot of missing values, and there was no common field to be able to merge it successfully with Copernicus without doing any pre-processing, let's say. So what did we do? We did aggregate the data per state and per day. However, even though we managed to solve this problem, there was another one. Copernicus server had limited server capacity, and it would take us a lot of time to retrieve all the climate data that we needed to be able to meet the deadlines that we had. Therefore, we decided to change the database for the climate variables. We switched to NOAA and Meteostat, and the data was extracted directly from climate stations. We chose 5 different stations per state, and we were trying to cover the whole state. We had here the numerical variables, binary variables, as you can see in the slide, temperature, wind, and other binary variables, like if there was snow or not. And then the Meteostat, we used it because on the NOAA database, we had some missing values, and we wanted to make a comprehensive data set, so we tried to fill it up with the other variables that were more present in the other data set. So how did we merge this data at the end and pre-process it? Because we were working with different sources. What we did was structure a pipeline. First of all, we did get the data from MDAT, which the first step was location normalization, because on this document and this database, the location was written differently. It was not consistent throughout the whole database, so we have to extract it and restructure it so that we could use it for merging. Also, we pre-processed the date information, creating a start date and an end date, calculating the disaster duration. By doing this, we also had the data from NOAA, which was divided by stations, and then we have the Meteostat data with more climatic data combined with the NOAA. So what did we do? We merged them by state and by date, and we pre-process it to be able to have it as input for our model. We had some different missing values, and what we did was replace the missing values on the binary variables with 0, and the numerical variables, we substitute them with linear interpolation. Now for the model, I'm going to talk about the model architecture, the training, and the performance results. To start with the model architecture, we were working with a neural network with 2 LSTM layers with 8 hyperparameters and 7 data parameters, which were modifications done to the data previous to the implementation of the model, like how many days are we going to use for the moving average, for example. So, key aspects of our model, the prediction window. The model is prepared to predict disasters up to 21 days. However, you can change this anything between 5 and 50 days. But we found that the one that yielded the best results was 21 days. Also, we work with class weights. Misclassifying disasters are penalized double compared to non-disasters. Why is this? Because we have a very unbalanced data set, which leads to the model to, if it predicts a non-disaster, it will be right 95% of the time. However, disasters are very little, and we did this to try and balance a bit. Also, we train local models, one per pair of state and disaster type, because storms in Texas can be very different from floods in Mississippi. So we were trying to get these specific patterns that we will find per pair. And also we have 3 different model configuration, small, medium, and large. The small one had 75 LSTM units, and then the medium was 2 times bigger, and the large was 6 times bigger with 450 units. Now we're going to talk about the training. We use the Kaggle NVIDIA E100 GPUs, which really accelerated the process and helped a lot with the training and refining the model. As you can see in this graph, on the x-axis you have the date, and on the y-axis you have the output probability of our model for a disaster to happen. The blue line is the probability in the next 21 days, and then the red line is the disaster. What we were trying is that the model anticipates the disaster and raises an alarm before the disaster. So the valid window would be between 21 and 5 days prior to the disaster, which is in green. As you can see here, the model correctly raises an alarm from some days even before the green window, which shows that it accurately identifies it. More different cases. On the top, you can see an example where no disaster is happening, and you can see that the model does not raise any false alarm. And on the second one, we have a more complex scenario, where we have two disasters, one after another, which are very close, and this can be very challenging for the model, because as you can see here, it only raises the alarm for the second event. However, you can see that the trend is upgoing from the beginning, and this shows that even in those scenarios like this one, it can be useful. Now let's go into the exact results. We used for this performance evaluation the refined recall, which is the percentage of disasters predicted between 21 and 5 days prior to the actual disaster. If it was detected 4 days or less, it's considered as not predicted, because what we want is early warnings. So you can see here the Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana dates. As you can see in Texas, we got very good results with the 51 precision, and 7 out of 10 tornadoes, cyclones in Texas are detected within the minimum of 5 days before and maximum of 21. However, we yield poorer results in Mississippi and Louisiana. In other states, we also have interesting results. In general, we have pretty good results in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, but the difference here will be that, surprisingly, against the other slide, you can see that it was not the small model, the one that yielded the best results, just in Oklahoma. In the other hand, in Kansas, the medium outperformed the small, and the large was better for Arkansas. Now we're going to talk about the GIS viewer, which is like the more actionable part of our project and what we created to make it more accessible for everyone to our data. And how can we make our data set usable? I'm going to put a video. We did use GIS framework, which is a framework for geographical information systems. And as you will see here, the main character of our application, it's a map where the 6 states that we use are represented, with 5 stations per state, accounting for 30 stations. We have 3 sections: historical data, which is our database, which is only available here in our product because we did combine the other data sets. And we have defined different filters for it to be more accessible. As you can see, you can select the date, anything from what we chose, which is 2010 in advance, can be chosen, and also you can select the climate variable that you want to see. It has a small button for information and description about the variable, because they're always not very self-descriptive. And you apply it, and you can see on the icons for each station, if you hover onto them, you can see the name and also their color according to the legend. Also, we added this small information about how the database was built, which is what I have been explaining. And then for the disasters data, this is also combining the data with our MDAT database, that we processed. You can select a disaster, which, as you can see here, you have a wide variety of them. Some of them affect to more than one state. And what you will get is different key information about the disasters. You also can select the variable for it to be painted on the graph. And then you have some informations, like, for example, the data slider. If you go back and forth, you can go to prior dates before the disaster, see the data during the disaster, and also after the disaster. You have some disaster info with the societal variables, and also a graph with insurance cost, because, as we said, this was meant to be for insurance companies. Then for the predictions, the last section, It will include the predictions for the next 20 days. And as we said, we chose flood and storms to be working with. So you can choose between those two these natural disasters. And also you can select the date under. And it will be painted on the graph. As you can see, there is a legend on the low right corner which identifies and colors by very low risk from 0 to very high risk to 1, so that it can be very informative and very useful for companies. We're trying that they can actually just see at one site what the results are and what they can, and give tools for them to take more database decisions. We did create this application using the library Open Layers in JavaScript, and it was the platform was developed with Node.js, which is framework used for web applications. And we used shapefiles for the geometries and being able to correctly represent the map. Now we're going to go to the last section, which is economic estimates and how can we estimate the impact of a disaster. Okay, so we can see here in this graph the yearly trend from the 2000. We only use the data from 2010, but it's useful to see the whole picture because it will give us some context. We can see the rising peak in 2005. But if we focus on 2010 onwards, we can see that the number of total events have been in an upcoming trend. And also you can see that the total damage and the insured damage have been going relatively up too, which is something to take into account. If we look at different states, we can see that the total damage and insured damage is higher in Louisiana. Insured damage is a key metric because it shows the financial liability for the insurance companies, and it's something to take into account, especially when it's more or less across all of them half of the total damage. As you can see, Louisiana, Texas, and Kansas lead the ranking for damage. And also, if you look at the other graph, it's important to see that for states like Louisiana, it's not specifically that it has more disasters, but the fact that it has the ones with higher damages associated, as you can see, as well as Texas, which are the two ones that have the greatest ones. Then also, you cannot just look at any analysis just by state because there is differences between the disaster type, and as you can see for Louisiana and Texas there is a big difference in storms and flood damages, but in Mississippi or Kansas it is more balanced. So the insurance companies should be always taking into account the difference between disaster types. What key actionable insights do we recommend for insurance companies? We have in mind that decreasing tendency in frequency and severity. It is something that they should take into account in any context. They should revise the price and coverage of the policies. We aim for them to use the prediction that we produce it to be able to compare the risk and change everything accordingly. Also, we would consider diversifying clients because, as you saw, states like Louisiana have a lot of damages associated to their natural events, as well as insured damage covered. So we would recommend diversifying between different states to try and balance out. And lastly, we would consider partnerships with other insurance companies for reserve allocation in case of extreme events. In conclusions, we did have to adapt to data challenges because we were working with different resources. It's real data, it's not clean, it has noises, and we had to pre-process it to be able to use it for our model. We think that we get robust predictions despite the complexity. We did not get 80–90% of precision, but we think that is not very realistic to expect those when we're predicting climate. And also, we try to give accessibility to this complex analysis with our platform. And also, we have the dual impact of risk predictions that we think it's valuable both for insurance companies and society in general, because it can help save lives. And obviously, we know that there is room for future improvements, that the model could be ameliorated, and we had limited resources. But we hope that this leads the way for future changes. Thank you. Y ahora para el resumen en español, bueno, empezar un poco con, repetirme un poquito, pero bueno, empezar con los motivos. Evidentemente, pues lo que decía, el cambio climático es algo que está muy presente hoy en día. Las temperaturas están subiendo y eso afecta a los delicados patrones de clima que hay en el planeta. Entonces, teniendo en cuenta estos datos, viendo los datos, cómo ha ido subiendo la cantidad de desastres, cómo ha ido subiendo su severidad, cómo es algo global, pues nosotros queríamos dar un poco de ayuda y un poco de luz en cuanto a conseguir que esos datos se ayudasen a tomar decisiones. ¿Qué es lo que hicimos? Pues esta aplicación. ¿Y qué hicimos para ello? Bueno, pues cogimos datos de diferentes bases de datos, como puede ser MDAT, que es una base de datos en la que encontramos variables humanas, variables económicas y de impacto, así como otras variables donde encontramos datos climáticos, como puede ser NOAA, Meteostat o Copernicus. Nos enfrentamos a varios problemas a la hora de conseguir los datos. Como bien expliqué, Copernicus tenía una capacidad máxima en el servidor, entonces tuvimos que hacer un pequeño cambio, pero básicamente después de encontrar unas buenas bases de datos, lo que hicimos fue seleccionar 6 estados de Estados Unidos en concreto, porque bueno, tenía bastante sentido en cuanto a geográficamente estaban más o menos en la misma posición. Y luego también cogimos datos desde 2010 porque nos parecía que era una buena opción para coger esa periodicidad de los datos y que el modelo pudiera cogerlo bien. Entonces, una vez teníamos los datos preparados, ¿qué es lo que hicimos? Pues fue entrenar el modelo. El modelo es una red neuronal que tiene 2 capas. Tuvimos diferentes configuraciones, una más pequeña, otra mediana y otra más grande. Y entonces, cuando lo entrenamos, ¿qué decidimos hacer con esos resultados? Pues para que pudieran ser accesibles, lo que hicimos fue hacer esta aplicación para mostrarlos, tanto la base de datos históricos como de predicciones, y para ello usamos el framework de JavaScript y Node.js y la librería de OpenLayers. Con esto, ¿qué es lo que intentábamos? Pues que para todas las personas que estuvieran interesadas, porque esto no es solamente útil para compañías aseguradoras, sino pues también pues para gobiernos o la sociedad en general, lo que intentábamos era crear una herramienta de previsión que avisara con tiempo suficiente de antelación, porque pues para las compañías aseguradoras es importante prevenir riesgos, pero también es importante para la sociedad en general para salvar vidas. Entonces decidimos hacer esto y esperamos que sea de ayuda.
Muchas gracias. Continuamos. El siguiente es Anomaly Detection and Prediction using Clinical Sensors Data Streams. Y lo han realizado Mónica de Álvaro, Paula Gutiérrez, Diego Hernández y Alejandro Taboada, y han colaborado con el Hospital Niño Jesús.
Well, good morning, everyone. Today, I will be presenting on behalf of my team our project on anomaly detection and prediction using clinical sensors data streams, which was done in collaboration with the Pediatric Hospital of Niño Jesús in Madrid. Now, before getting into all the details of the technical part, I wanted to set the context. In the intense care unit of the hospital, the patients' vitals are constantly being monitored, and a lot of false alarms are constantly going off, which overwhelms the staff. And so our hope is to, a lot of alarms are being triggered, which overwhelm the medical staff, which causes delays in dealing with the true emergencies. So we hope to help them in two goals. First of all, we want to help them detect when a false alarm is going off. To do this, we will apply anomaly detection. And on the other hand, we will also predict when a patient constants are going to change, so we can detect when a timely intervention is needed for the hospital staff. Now, let's talk about the data that we worked with. Despite the best efforts of the hospital, we were not able to obtain the rights to work with their data in time for us to use it with our project, so we had to look for an alternative. In this case, we found the VitalDB dataset, which is an open source dataset that contains the physiological signs that were collected during surgeries in Korean hospitals. In this dataset, we can find several key signals, which are the electrocardiograms, heart rate, arterial pressure, or even oxygen saturation, which were considered key vital signs pointed out to us by the hospital. So even though we did not have their data, we could work with the similar vital signs. Now, some key characteristics to mention about the data is the first one being that it is unlabeled, meaning none of the anomalies or change points or any of the interventions or shifts in the data were marked. We were basically working with just a timestamp and a magnitude for each of them, which means that we had no ground truth or no way of really evaluating our results, which kind of affects the whole presentation. Now, another aspect that I wanted to mention is the fact that they are interrupted signals. Why is this? Like I said, this data is collected from surgeries, but not all of the machines were turned on at the same time. So there are gaps in the timeline where we have a lot of missing values and no data to work with. So we just had to look for those parts where the machines were on, and this is how we dealt with it. Now, before really working with the data, some pre-processing needed to be done. And in some cases, the signals had the machines were on for a long period of time, so we had too many signs, and we needed to cut it off in subsampling to so smaller chunks so that we could work with it due to computational costs. And also, before really working with it, we needed to apply other techniques at times, like normalization, or even applying sliding windows, which are very common for time series, and also specifically for online methods. Okay, so moving on to what we did for our first goal, anomaly detection, to help them prevent false alarms. Before going into the details of what we applied, I wanted to clarify what we mean by anomaly detection. When we're talking about anomaly detection, we basically mean detecting when an outlier or a point that doesn't perform like the expected behavior occurs. Now, to do this, we have two main categories of methods. The main ones, the traditional ones, are more mathematical threshold methods, which are the statistical methods. We have predictions like using ARIMA or IQR methods, like which are basically cutting off a point based on the prediction or the quantile. And then we have the machine learning methods, which are more complex and can give us better performance for this type of data. Now, machine learning methods in this case, they have the capacity of learning the underlying patterns and the deviations in the data. They can understand the complex relationships between the different occurrences. So given the nature of our own labeled data set, we could focus on two main groups, the unsupervised learning ones and the deep learning methods. I will explain each of the methods as we go along. And I just wanted to clarify, we did apply a lot more of the methods, but we wanted to focus on the ones that we believe could possibly give us a better outcome in the future. Now, the first method I wanted to talk about for anomaly detection are one-class support vector machines. How these work is they basically try to find a boundary around what is considered to be the normal data, and anything that falls outside of this boundary will be detected as an anomaly. It works especially well when it has a high-dimensional case and when the cases of anomalies are not very large. So in this case, we applied it to both. We have them on the right for both heart rate and arterial pressure, and we can see how the points are being flagged. For pre-processing, we also applied some normalization and an RBF kernel. Now, another interesting method for anomalies is isolation forest, which, like the name indicates, comes from a similar method as the random forest. It uses binary trees to partition the data, and it works on the assumption that the anomalies are going to be the first points to be isolated. So we applied it to our data set. Specifically here, we can see the heart rate. And to do this, we also applied a sliding window, so we focus on a chunk and we start moving it forward. The results vary a lot if we change the sequence length and the overlap. And a specific parameter here that we can play with, which is very specific for the isolation forest, is the contamination rate, which represents the percentage of anomalies that should be found in the data or can be expected to be found. And now, finally, for when it comes to anomaly detections, we wanted to mention the autoencoders, which are some deep learning techniques. It is a neural network which basically compresses the data into a lower dimensional space, keeping mainly its main features, and then it reconstructs it. So how do we detect the anomalies with these techniques? What we do is, after reconstructing the data, we measure the error between the prediction and the reconstructed and the true value. So the cases where the error is very high, we can set a different threshold, but the cases where with a high error are considered to be anomalies since they didn't perform as expected. This can be shown in the different plots. We tried 3 different types of autoencoders, dense, CNNs, and transformers. Each of them has its own pros and cons. So the dense autoencoders, they are very simple and fast to train. They will capture all of the obvious anomalies, but they will struggle with the more complex patterns underneath. CNNs, on the other hand, will be able to detect more the local patterns and some local fluctuations, which are very common for heart rate. And the transformers are the more complex and robust option. They use a global attention, and they can capture both the local patterns and long-term dependencies. So they give us the more efficient results, but when it comes to balancing the complexity and effectiveness, CNNs may be a better option. Now, moving on to our second goal, which is the change point detection, to be able to predict when a doctor should intervene or a patient's condition has changed. Once again, just to clarify, the change point detections is meant to identify a point where some statistical properties have changed. This could be the mean, the trend, variance, anything that will indicate that we have transitioned into a new behavior of the data. So as before, we have 2 main groups, statistical and machine learning techniques. In the statistical one here, we can differentiate between parametric and non-parametric techniques, whether or not they have, based on whether they use or have some assumption on the underlying distribution of the data. And in some other machine learning techniques as before, which can be unsupervised or deep learning methods like clustering and LSTMs. So when it comes to change point detection, we found the ruptures library very useful. This library is a Python library which is specifically designed with a lot of built-in methods to detect change points and shifts in data. Here it has both parametric, non-parametric, and machine learning techniques, going from clustering to other of the more mathematical options. We will go into a couple of the algorithms that we found most useful, and I will also mention that you can customize the cost function, which makes it more flexible and personalizable. Now, the first algorithm from the ruptures library I will be talking about is the bottom-up algorithm. It is a hierarchical algorithm which basically starts considering each unique point as its own segment and then starts joining them to minimize the cost function. In this case, the cost function is an RBF, which is radial basis function, which basically measures the dissimilarity and starts joining them. Now, the key in here is to find the optimal number of segments, balancing the cost. As we can see in the plot above, we have the cost and the number of segments. Like in some clustering methods, in this case, we want to find the need to find that optimal balance. It's also known as the elbow method sometimes. And below, we can see how it has partitioned the data based on that number of segments and the different characteristics, which can clearly be observed that at times the trend changes. Now, another interesting algorithm we found was the window-based algorithm. Here, basically, we start sliding a window of a fixed size, and it compares both sides. And if there is a change in the statistical properties, it will detect a shift. Now, this algorithm works pretty well, but it requires a quite educated guess on one of the parameters, which is the number of breakpoints. And since we're not experts, we tried to balance out several values and seeing how it would change. And as we can see below, it really changes how the results are shown. Now, another method that we wanted to talk about is, this case, it's an unsupervised technique, clustering method, in this case, k-means. Particularly, we wanted to reproduce an online scenario where you first train the model and then use it on incoming data. That's what online method means. Basically, you have real-time data coming in, and you don't have the whole structure to work with in one go. So first of all, we trained the data. To do this, we created a matrix based on the n previous timestamps plus the magnitude at the current one. And with this, we trained the k-means model, saving the centroids. Now, in the new case for prediction, we wanted to simulate that online case. So we recreate the matrix as soon as you have enough timestamps to work with, and you assign each new point to a cluster. The second that one change point, one of the new points has changed from the previous cluster, we consider it a change point. And now finally, we wanted to talk about LSTMs, a long short-term memory. These are recurrent neural networks which can capture the long-term dependencies in sequential data. We use them in two different ways, which basically differ in how they model the data. Using it as an autoencoder, as we explained before, in this case, we compress the data and then reconstruct it. The difference here is that when we detect an anomaly, since it was built sequentially, it means that the previous data has changed, so that's why the error was higher, and we can consider it as a change point. And now, when it is used as a predictor, you basically just start feeding it the historical data and start predicting the next value, and when there is a large error, based on different thresholds, you can detect a shift and a change point. Both of these cases were done with the same sliding window parameters, same sequential length, same overlap, which means they are both comparable, so you can see the difference of applying it as an autoencoder and as a predictor. Now, closing off, just a quick recap. We had two main goals: applying anomaly detection and change point detection for false alarms and for predicting a shift in the patient's condition. We applied different statistical and machine learning methods, each time adapting the pre-processing and the data for each of them. But I wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we had. First of all, we did not have access to the hospital's data, so although we had data from surgeries, like we saw, there are a lot of peaks and downfalls in these, and they might not be the best case to train an algorithm based on what is supposed to be normal data and normal conditions. And second of all, the main challenge that we wanted to highlight is the fact that it was an unlabeled data set, meaning we had no ground truth to work with and no way of really evaluating our results. And given our limited medical knowledge, we weren't really able to optimize all of these parameters, but we hope to give the hospital enough insight so that they can continue the research when they do. Which brings us to the next point of our future work. Initially, we wanted to plan a meeting with the hospital staff, with the doctors, not just the engineers we were working with. And the idea was for us to be able to flag some of these anomalies and change points, and this way we would have some kind of ground truth to actually work with and to apply maybe semi-supervised methods which will help us improve. Y ahora un poco solo por concluir en español, para resumir, el objetivo de este trabajo era ayudar al hospital con la monitorización de las señales vitales en la UCI. Tienen dos problemas principales con los que querían que les ayudásemos. Por un lado, querían poder evitar que saltasen tantas falsas alarmas en sus sistemas debido a las anomalías, y además también querían que les ayudásemos a poder predecir o detectar cuando ha ocurrido un cambio en las señales vitales de un paciente y así poder intervenir a tiempo. En cuanto a los datos, no pudimos trabajar con los datos del hospital, pero así que encontramos una alternativa, que era la base de datos de VitalDB, que contiene información sobre colectados durante operaciones quirúrgicas que se fueron tratando. Una de las características principales es que no tenían ningún tipo de marca, o sea, ni etiqueta. Entonces, aplicamos dos métodos, uno para cada problema. En primer lugar, teníamos la detección de anomalías para las falsas alarmas y el cambio de change point detection, encontrar puntos de cambio. Para ambos utilizamos tanto métodos estadísticos como métodos de machine learning. Hemos intentado hablar sobre todo de los que hemos encontrado que podían potencialmente dar los mejores resultados, sobre todo los de deep learning y algunos de machine learning. En cuanto a los retos, uno de los principales, como hemos mencionado, es el hecho de que al no tener etiquetas no podíamos verificar los resultados. Esto ha sido un poco un problema porque hemos tenido que probar varios y el objetivo que teníamos al final era intentar buscar algunos que potencialmente pudiesen dar los mejores resultados y que en pasos futuros se pudiesen usar con la ayuda de validación de médicos un sistema más robusto para poder ponerlo en práctica. Gracias por vuestra atención.
Muchas gracias. Vamos con el último, titulado Mobility and Daily Routine Analysis, a Geolocation-Based Approach to Psychological Assessment. Lo han realizado Sergio Rodríguez, Eva Pérez, Regen Chía y Afina Nurova. Adelante.
Good morning. We are Team 8, and we are going to present our project in personalized mobility characterization, which we developed in collaboration with evidence-based behavior. We are going to see the problem statement, the resources, and some work that we had to carry out to get to our results and some conclusions. Before beginning, I would like you all to think about if you have your phone location activated, and if that's the case, how much do you think that someone can get to know about you just from your location data? Well, that's the main challenge that we wanted to tackle for the project. In specific, our goal was extracting users' routines and behavior using only their mobile's location data, even if this data is anonymized. Studying mobility patterns is very impactful in many different general aspects. It can help resource optimization, it can have a great environmental impact, and it can offer valuable insights for businesses and better their economic approach. In the healthcare system, mobility data offers a non-invasive and objective perspective that is not subject to the patient's or to the medic's biases. Such things happen with self-reports or even with follow-up visits. So they can offer valuable health insights that can help develop specific treatment plans, and not only that, but you can also monitor the success of these treatments. This project was powered by Evidence-Based Behavior, which is a company that studies mobility patterns and mental health care. The first step in their work is to collect the digital footprint of a person, and then they transform it into useful information for them to share with the health personnel, caregivers, and family, who can use this powerful information to improve the quality of life of their patients and their loved ones. Some specific objectives that we had during our project were detecting unique locations, identifying patterns in the data and users' daily routines, and developing strategies and general metrics that can be applied to any new user's data. The data that we were working with was structured in 7 data sets with 7 million observations each. So we had a very large amount of data. And they all had the same 12 variables that was reduced to a subset of 5. This was due to many different reasons. Some of them had to be discarded due to mismatches between them and other more reliable variables that convey the same information. And other ones had to be discarded because of big precision errors at collection time. This was the case for the the speed of the user at that time, the travel distance, and the app accuracy. So the subset of features that we worked with included the service, which is a unique identifier linking the user with their cohort or study, the user ID, the timestamp, and then latitude and longitude, which are the location variables. It's important to note that these are anonymized, they're shifted and rotated, so we cannot access the real GPS coordinates of the user and further include information about the user's location with that. So we are dealing with a high computational cost, but we're also dealing with very low informational value and many empty and incorrect values in our data. Starting with geolocation, we first had to handle these missing values. In orange, you can see variables that we ended up discarding. And in blue, you would see the percentage of missing values in location data. Altitude was discarded, not because of the percentage of missing values, but because it had a very low variability, so it really didn't offer much information about any user, probably due to the anonymization process that the data underwent. And latitude and longitude had approximately 15% of missing values that we inputted using polynomial interpolation, only when the number of consecutive timestamps that were missing was less than 3. The rest of cases were discarded from the study, and you can also see a time series plot for latitude and longitude for a specific user and specific date. You can see that we are not only working with missing values, but we also have the problem of an inconsistent recording or record frequency, and we also have very big time slots where we have no information about the location of the users. So our first task was finding the unique locations for each user. For that, we used DBSCAN, which is a density-based spatial clustering for applications with noise. It is effective at grouping points without specifying a fixed number of locations, and we only had to choose 2 hyperparameters. The first one was the minimum number of points to be considered a unique location, which was set to 2. To discard transit locations, and epsilon, which is very important because it would denote the maximum allowed distance for which 2 points would correspond to the same location. We set it to approximately 100 meters, and this is very important because if epsilon is too high, we can risk merging into one single locations that are actually distinct, and if it's too low, then we can separate a unique location into more than one identifiable cluster. And another critical aspect when working with geospatial clustering techniques like DBSCAN is the metric system. Our data was expressed in decimal degrees, which involved using the Haberstein distance metric, which is very complex computationally, and we had to modify our data so that we could work with Euclidean distances to simplify the process. This metric wouldn't allow to include the Earth roundness, let's say, but because our data is anonymized, this is not a problem to us, and it doesn't include any error in our computation. Some solutions that we obtained once we found the unique locations for users were extracting daily routine patterns. We tried two different approaches. The first one was a relative frequency metric. What we did was we grouped data by hour and day of the week for each user, and we calculated the relative frequency of each cluster for that combination. And a routine was established if a cluster's relative frequency was bigger than 50%. And to further refine this strategy, we included the Shannon entropy, which involves a data preparation similar to the previous one, but we calculate a probability matrix, and then we also calculate the Shannon entropy for each combination of hour of the day and moment of the week. Here you can see an example where the user has its most likely location between 12 and 6 a.m. being cluster 0, and the associated entropy for that moment is very close to 0, meaning that this routine is very stable, and we can rely on the fact that the cluster 0 is probably a part of the user's routine. The next thing we wanted to do was to identify home and work. This is a more complex task, so we first had to manage a workaround because we had a lot of data and we couldn't just apply the DBS scan over a grouping of one single user over their whole location data to identify the unique clusters and all of the recordings. So what we did was first extract the daily cluster centroids for each user. And once we did that, we labeled them as home, work, or not identifiable. Home was marked if the cluster was, if the user spent time in that cluster in nighttime hours, starting from 12 to 3 a.m. for at least 5 hours. Work was marked for clusters where the user spent from 5 to 8 consecutive hours during the daytime, and none or not identifiable was marked for the rest of cases. The next thing we did was using this reduced data set where we had the centroids, the daily centroids, and instead of timestamps we had hour ranges. We performed the second DBS scan over this to merge the centroids that belong to the same locations, and we analyzed the merge label to determine the final one. If 70%, at least 17% of the labels were home or work, we left that as the final label. And in the cases where we had at least or more 25% of labels being not identifiable, we decided to leave it as not identified. In the rare cases where none of those options applied, we included a label being home/work where we think it may be one of those. Using this approach, we detected the home and work locations and detected 20% of patients that were working. 20% of patients spent most of their time at home without leaving. And this approach highlighted moves or job changes because we would have different century locations marked as home or work. And the second approach we took was using the relative frequency and routines that we just explained. And what we did was analyze the nighttime hours for the users, and if they had a routine established for at least 4 consecutive days, then we said that that was their home. In dataset 2, using this approach, we obtained the home of 50 users out of 65. And then we developed an extensive set of user metrics. First of all, we wanted to develop a mobility index. We created this by using different mobility features that we extracted, such as the distance traveled, the time traveled, etc. And we did a linear combination of these. The weights that we decided to include were selected according to what we thought was more important, but these can be modified depending on the type of study. We also analyzed the transportation methods of the users with the following labels. We did this by extracting the average speed and the distance traveled by the user between timestamps. We analyzed most common routes and clusters using the unique locations. and some other metrics such as the coverage area, data consistency, and speed statistics of the users were also included. Some implemental results that we obtained. The first thing we wanted to do is test if the user metrics and the analysis that we carried out was actually useful to characterize users. So what we did was we trained over the user metrics data set composed by the following features that you can see, and we applied a simple random forest algorithm over a reduced input set obtained with PCA and smooth class balancing. And we obtained a 96% accuracy and a pretty high F1 score for all service labels, which means that our features are actually useful to characterize users in the way that we want it. And finally, we also created a dashboard where you can visualize. We can visualize some of the metrics and results for the user. Here we can filter by date, and we see some the clusters, the trajectory, and we can see the centroids, analytics about the user's metrics, their routines per week, per hour, and the transportation methods, and this would be the trajectory of a user throughout all the recorded data. So to finish off, we would like to conclude that we effectively achieved all of the proposed objectives, and we probably can say that step 2 of the EB2 methodology has been completed by our group, and these user metrics and our analysis can be used for further studies with more extensive health information, or by any other group who wants to study mobility data in any other context. Thank you for listening, and now a small recap of the presentation in English, in Spanish. Somos el grupo 8 y hemos presentado nuestro proyecto en caracterización de movilidad personalizada. El objetivo era poder extraer las rutinas de usuario y sus comportamientos a través de sus datos de localización. Esos datos eran datos que estaban anonimizados y que a la empresa que nos ha empujado a hacer este proyecto, Evidence-Based Behavior, le interesa específicamente en el área de salud mental. Algunos objetivos que queríamos cumplir era detectar localizaciones únicas a lo largo del día, identificar patrones y rutinas diarias de los usuarios y poder establecer estrategias y métricas generales que se puedan aplicar a cualquier nuevo usuario con sus datos de localización. Usamos 7 datasets con 7 millones de observaciones cada uno, mucha cantidad de datos, pero las variables con las que trabajamos realmente consistían en esencia en el ID de usuario. Sí que teníamos un ID relacionando al usuario con su estudio y sus datos de localización en el tiempo. Aplicamos un método de clustering geoespacial que se llama DBScan para poder detectar las localizaciones únicas, y con ello también analizamos rutinas diarias usando frecuencia y entropía de Shannon para poder establecer esos patrones. Después identificamos el trabajo y la casa de los usuarios, y también desarrollamos numerosas métricas de usuario que pueden ser generalizables, como el índice de movilidad, los métodos de transporte y muchas otras estadísticas sobre sus datos y su comportamiento. Finalmente, comprobamos que estas métricas sí que son aplicables y suficientes para poder caracterizar a los usuarios, y también desarrollamos un dashboard que ya habéis visto, en el que enseñamos un poco un resumen de todas las analíticas que podemos extraer de los usuarios. Así que nada, muchas gracias.
Muy bien, Pues hemos terminado ya con las presentaciones, con esta última, en la que hemos colaborado con Evidence-Based Behavior. Y vamos a pasar a la última parte de la jornada, en la que vamos a censar básicamente a las entidades que han colaborado con nosotros y a los estudiantes para ver qué les ha parecido. Entonces, va a hablar primero, en representación de las instituciones, aunque él dé una visión personal, David Méndez, que va a hablar, que pertenece al Sandoz, y que, bueno, para mí también es un orgullo porque es uno de los estudiantes de la primera promoción de este grado. Y, bueno, estoy muy contento de escucharle. Gracias, David. Adelante.
Buenos días a todos. Antes de nada, dar las gracias tanto a la universidad como a los alumnos y a las entidades colaboradoras, a Fernando, por invitar a Sandoz como entidad colaboradora por segundo año consecutivo y darnos la oportunidad de participar en un proyecto tan estupendo como lo es esta asignatura de Proyecto de Ciencia de Datos. La verdad es que habéis puesto el listón súper alto con todas vuestras presentaciones que habéis realizado hoy, y todos y cada uno de vosotros os tendréis que sentir muy orgullosos del trabajo que habéis hecho. Y ya no solo lo que habéis presentado hoy, sino por todo el esfuerzo que estas tienen detrás. Así que no puedo hacer otra cosa más que felicitaros y daros mi enhorabuena. Comienzo por presentarme. Yo soy David Méndez, Advanced Analytics especialista en Sandoz. Y bueno, en Sandoz nos dedicamos a facilitar el acceso a la salud a los pacientes, vendiendo tanto medicamentos genéricos como biosimilares en más de 120 países en el mundo. Y dentro de las miles de funciones que os podéis imaginar que tenemos en la compañía, ¿no? Pues yo pertenezco al Hub de Innovación Financiera dentro de Sandoz Global. En este hub, si nos centramos en la parte de ciencia de datos, nos dedicamos a simplificar y facilitar procesos mediante el forecasting, ya sea forecasting de ventas, de volúmenes, flujos de caja. E incluso tenemos un motor de predicción de la intensidad de la siguiente temporada de gripe para prevenir roturas de stock que puedan tener nuestros medicamentos. Y bueno, qué decir sobre esta colaboración, y es que desde Sandoz estamos encantados con la asignatura, ya no solo porque pueda servir para realizar pequeñas pruebas de concepto o algunos experimentos, sino por el gran potencial que tiene como herramienta de captación de talento. Y es que con el paso de las semanas, desde el inicio del proyecto, y creo que el resto de las entidades colaboradoras estaréis de acuerdo, se ha visto cómo los estudiantes han demostrado su capacidad de adaptarse a las dificultades y se han ido encontrando en el camino y cómo las han ido sobrepasando una tras otra, incluso superando las expectativas iniciales que teníamos. Consideramos además que la asignatura es un complemento perfecto para la formación académica que tienen los alumnos en el grado, y es que para muchos esta puede ser la primera toma de contacto con el mundo laboral. Toma de contacto que es muy importante a la hora de entrar en el mundo profesional. Porque sí, hacer modelos con datos ya limpios y sin anomalías está bien, pero la verdad es que lo realmente importante es el ser capaz de obtener y limpiar datos de fuentes que no vienen tan preparadas y saber interpretarlos de manera adecuada. Y ya no solo eso, si algo he aprendido en los años que llevo trabajando, es que incluso si tienes un modelo con un 99,999% de accuracy, el mejor modelo que has hecho en tu vida, no sirve para nada si no se sabe presentar de la manera adecuada. Hay que ser capaz de contar una historia coherente con los datos, ser capaces de defender por qué el modelo que habéis desarrollado realmente tiene un impacto en el negocio. No basta con presentar que el modelo tiene un RMC o un MAPE de 500. Te van a decir, ¿qué es ese 500? No sé qué significa. Lo que hay que decir es, mira, este modelo permite un ahorro de 2 millones de euros, lo que supone un 10% de ahorro respecto al proyecto que tenemos actualmente, e incluso es un 30% más preciso que este modelo que se hace ahora de forma manual, ¿no? Y aquí es donde ya sí que les va a interesar más a los jefes que tienen que comprar vuestro proyecto. Y es que esa es la clave, no solo tener los conocimientos técnicos, que es muy importante también, por supuesto, pero además saber vender por qué deberían usarse y su justificación correspondiente de negocio. Y esta capacidad es algo muy valioso que se obtiene, como casi todas las cosas, con práctica y con la experiencia. Y ahora, haciendo una pequeña referencia a aquellos que hayáis visto el juego del Calamar 2, se podría decir que yo ya estuve en estos juegos, como ha dicho Fernando. Y es que hace 3 años, por aquel 2022, en el que todavía recuerdo que había que llevar mascarilla en los espacios cerrados, cursé esta misma asignatura en este mismo grado, ¿no? Y por aquel entonces éramos la primera promoción y no teníamos ni la más remota idea de sobre qué iba esta asignatura. La cosa es que al terminar la asignatura, ¿no? Este año que era como un año piloto, pues vimos que quedaban muchas cosas por mejorar y me alegra ver que año tras año, siendo esta la cuarta edición, se han ido puliendo estas cosas. Y la conclusión es que la mayoría estuvimos de acuerdo en que era una de las mejores asignaturas que tuvimos por esta capa extra de realismo, ¿no?, que ofrece a la hora de trabajar en un entorno más parecido a lo que sería luego la vida profesional. Y en mi caso, gracias a los conocimientos que adquirí en este grado y en concreto en el proyecto que realicé en esta misma asignatura, pues me encuentro que llevo ya 3 años trabajando en Sandoz. Y es por ello que siempre estaré agradecido con lo que me ha dado esta universidad. Y como os habrá dicho Fernando, o os lo dirá, que además me acuerdo que a nosotros nos lo dijo este mismo día en el discurso que dará a continuación, así que Fernando, si te robo las palabras, lo siento, nos dijo que la universidad siempre va a estar aquí para ayudarnos en lo que necesitemos, pero que si en algún momento nosotros tenemos la oportunidad de dar algo, ya no a la universidad, sino a las personas que trabajan en ella, ya sea dando una clase o cualquier cosa, que lo hagamos. Y es que asignaturas como esta no existirían sin la colaboración de las empresas que proponemos nuestros proyectos. Por ello, os animo a todos vosotros y vosotras que si el día de mañana entráis en una empresa y veis la posibilidad de participar en esta asignatura o deis una charla o lo que sea, que lo hagáis sin ningún miedo, que además Fernando no muerde. Y es que también hay una parte bonita en todo esto, y es el compartir experiencias y conocimiento con otras personas que están pasando por situaciones similares a las que tú tuviste en su día. Así que nada más, os animo mucho en estos últimos meses que os quedan, ya para muchos va a ser la recta final de vuestros estudios, y recordad que todos y cada uno de vosotros tenéis un gran futuro por delante. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, David, por tus palabras tan cariñosas. Vamos a terminar con la opinión vuestra, la más importante, la de los estudiantes. Alejandro, cuando quieras.
Bueno, buenos días a todos de nuevo. Esta vez me subo aquí como representante de todos mis compañeros aquí presentes. Lo primero, queríamos dar las gracias a Fernando por esta oportunidad para poder expresarnos como parte que completa el círculo de universidad, empresas y estudiantes, pero sobre todo como personas que tienen una experiencia que compartir. Queremos aprovechar esta breve intervención para haceros llegar un poquito de nuestra perspectiva de lo vivido estos últimos meses. Al principio del cuatrimestre, como otros años, todos traíamos una idea en la cabeza de cómo podía ser esta asignatura, ¿no? Ya fuera porque hubiésemos hablado con compañeros que ya lo hubieran hecho o de haber mirado los criterios de evaluación. Es importante saber si hay examen o no hay examen antes de la propia asignatura o sencillamente del nombre, Proyecto en Ciencia de Datos. Bueno, pues llegó el primer día y todo empezó y acabó tal que así. Buenos días, esta es la primera y última clase de la asignatura. Tenéis que firmar todos estos papeles. Esas personas con las que casualmente no estáis sentados ahora mismo son tus compañeros de trabajo por los próximos 4 meses. Tenéis en el mail vuestros contactos de la empresa concertando una primera reunión para ayer, a la que deberíais haberos leído todos estos papers. Tendremos una evaluación intermedia en un par de semanas y ya nos vemos en enero. Gracias y adiós. Bueno, hoy ya, habiendo sobrevivido a ese choque inicial y superado la asignatura, aquellas ideas iniciales no pueden quedar más lejos de la realidad. Hemos vivido una experiencia académica única y, sobre todo, enriquecedora, de la que podemos decir que ha tenido puntos muy positivos y puntos muy auténticos. El punto positivo por excelencia ha sido la colaboración con empresas y entidades reales en proyectos y desafíos actuales. Ese realismo nos ha sido trasladado a todos los niveles, algunos más novedosos y llamativos, como es visitar oficinas, trabajar por objetivos, reuniones semanales, feedback de profesionales, y otros ni tan llamativos ni tan novedosos como lo es trabajar con datos reales, que son incompletos, incoherentes, en formatos confusos, que hay que procesar y volver a procesar, para después de dedicarle semanas a pelear cada línea de código, descubrir un camino mejor a la semana siguiente y que parezca que nada ha servido. Esto, aunque suena frustrante, nos ha enseñado mucho. Perseverancia en las tareas, paciencia en los resultados y pensamiento crítico con las propuestas. No lo cambiaríamos en absoluto, porque sabemos que ahí fuera los datos no son perfectos, son reales, y una de las buenas virtudes del científico o ingeniero de datos es saber lidiar con estas situaciones, que muchas veces premian más el trabajar con unos buenos datos que el tener el modelo más complejo. Por otra parte, el punto auténtico por excelencia han sido los equipos de trabajo. Somos una carrera relativamente pequeña, aunque este año se haya incorporado la gente del doble grado, donde nos conocemos todos mejor o peor y hay muy buen ambiente. Aunque suene raro, solemos formar grupos con las mismas personas en cada proyecto, porque queremos estar con nuestros amigos o queremos trabajar con las personas con las que mejor sinergia hacemos para obtener mejores notas. Nos esperábamos que nos dividieran en grupos. No pasa nada, porque como buenos ingenieros, nuestros modelos grupales habituales son escalables a formatos de 2, de 3, de 4 o de 5 personas. Lo que sucedió es que se nos dividió en grupos muy distintos, siguiendo una distribución donde poca gente, por no decir nadie, había trabajado antes con sus compañeros. Esto continúa ese realismo que nos traslada esta asignatura, ya que en el mundo laboral no siempre elegiremos con quién trabajamos, y a veces nos tocará en equipos donde no nos sintamos del todo cómodo, y esto no puede ser utilizado como excusa para que un proyecto no salga adelante. En general, las experiencias en equipo han sido variadas. Algunos grupos han funcionado perfectamente desde el principio, mientras que otros lo han tenido que ir consiguiendo semana a semana. Pero todos, sin excepción, hemos tenido que superar retos de comunicación, horarios, roles, metodologías o diferencias en cuanto al compromiso. Que estemos hoy todos aquí y que hayamos presentado nuestros proyectos significa que incluso los casos más complicados, por unas u otras razones, han prosperado y aprendido a cómo adaptarse, cómo liderarse y, sobre todo, cómo resolver y lidiar con conflictos humanos. Aún así, de buscar algo que nos haya faltado en esta asignatura, nos hemos quedado con las ganas de una última experiencia como esta, de la mano de amigos, por el hecho que es de las últimas asignaturas del grado. Y qué mejor manera para despedirse lo grande que estar en la empresa que quieres con la gente que quieres. Pero entendemos que hay un factor de equidad y de diversidad que solo equipos y temas aleatorios puede aportar. El tercer y último punto, tanto positivo como auténtico, ha sido la guía recibida por parte de todas las personas que han trabajado activamente en nuestro desarrollo, siempre dispuestos a ayudar, guiándonos, aconsejándonos y corrigiendo nuestros esfuerzos de una manera muy correcta y humana, con una cercanía casi familiar. Esto ha sido clave para nosotros, sinceramente, ya que nos ha permitido no solo aprender de nuestras acciones, sino también aprender de la experiencia y el conocimiento de aquellos que van por delante en el camino. Y es por el hecho de haberlo hecho tan bien que al hablar entre nosotros de lo genial que ha estado cada proyecto, que hay personas que han sentido que no han recibido esta atención de la misma manera, intensidad o frecuencia que la persona que más lo ha hecho. Un pequeño e injusto sabor de boca raro de saber que la experiencia, aunque ya muy buena, podía haber sido incluso mejor. Y es que la comunicación con las empresas o los tutores, que no ha sido tan frecuente o activa, ha generado por momentos incertidumbre en aquellos grupos a la hora de tomar decisiones o el qué camino a seguir. Esto pone de manifiesto que, aunque haya sido una experiencia inolvidable, siempre hay margen de mejora para garantizar que en generaciones venideras se tenga el mismo nivel, ese máximo de apoyo y guía, igualando las oportunidades de aprender y avanzar hasta el final con los proyectos. En definitiva, esta asignatura ha sido incómoda. Nos ha sacado fuera de la zona de confort a la que nos tenían acostumbrados las asignaturas anteriores. Pero es esto lo que la hace tan intensa, porque es la disconformidad el motor del cambio, y hoy estamos aquí presentes las personas que ejerceremos el cambio allá donde vayamos. Desde nuestra posición queríamos animar a diferentes direcciones a implementar propuestas educativas atrevidas como esta, que van más allá del aspecto cognitivo del aprendizaje y no se restringen tanto a lo intelectual, sino que también fomentan el humanismo, que apuestan por nosotros ya no como alumnos que tanto tiempo llevamos siendo, sino como profesionales nobles en nuestro sector, perfectamente preparados y exigentes, que nos exprimen y sacan nuestras luces y sombras, pero que no dejan indiferente a nadie. Muchísimas gracias a nuestros tutores, empresas y dirección del grado por haber hecho esto posible. Gracias por no hacer que contemos créditos, sino que los créditos cuenten. Y es que es increíble que en una asignatura donde no se ha impartido ni una sola clase, ni ha habido ni un solo examen, lejos de no haberse enseñado de nada, se ha aprendido de todo. Muchas gracias.
Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias. Me alegro que las últimas dos contribuciones, tanto David como Alejandro, hayan sido tan buenas, porque yo no tengo tiempo para la mía, tenemos que marcharnos, me comprometí a dejar el salón de grados a la 1, tenemos que irnos. Entonces, lo único que voy a hacer es básicamente agradecer a todas las entidades que han colaborado con nosotros, a HPE, a Paco, María, que están por ahí, y bueno, más allá de Paco, María, también están Claudia, Inés, Paula, en SAS, Adriana, Amaya, Álvaro, Gonzalo, en Fiber, María, Darío y alguien más, al que yo no conozco. En Enfoque, yo he tenido contacto con Vanessa y David, pero sé que hay más personas involucradas. En Sandoz, David y Carlos, y seguro que también alguien más. En Blue Tab, María Ángeles, Cruz, Juan Carlos. En el Hospital Niño Jesús hemos hablado con Andrés y en EB2 con Antonio y Miguel Ángel. Muchas gracias a todos por colaborar con nosotros y por hacer esta experiencia posible. Y también gracias a los estudiantes porque, honestamente, yo cuando montamos ese workshop intermedio a mitad del cuatrimestre, veo las cosas muy negras. Pero luego, cuando llegáis aquí a defender vuestro trabajo en enero, la cosa ha cambiado sustancialmente. Entonces, de verdad me sorprendéis positivamente todos los años en ese sentido. Y aunque ya lo ha dicho David, vuelvo a decirlo. Dentro de unos meses os iréis de esta universidad y me gustaría que supierais que nosotros estamos aquí para ayudaros, tanto a la universidad como a las personas que trabajamos en ella, para lo que queráis. Si algún día pensáis que os podemos ayudar en algo, venid a nosotros, estaremos muy contentos de recibiros, ¿vale? Y viceversa, si algún día os llamo porque sabéis que en todas las ceremonias estas de graduación invitamos a un exalumno de la universidad que ha tenido una carrera muy brillante. Yo quiero que dentro de poco uno de esos alumnos venga del grado en Ciencia e Ingeniería de Datos. Entonces os llamaré para explicar cómo habéis llegado tan alto en la carrera profesional. Pero bueno, para eso y para otras cosas más sencillitas. Entonces, por favor, estaos abiertos también a devolver a la universidad algo de lo que la universidad os da. Y nada más, muchísimas gracias a todos y tenemos un cóctel ahí donde teníamos el café y a ver si podemos charlar un rato pues tranquilamente. Muchas gracias.